Chapter 1425. After a while, Lu Yi finally verified his conjecture. The jade plate's power could be activated at will, but it had a time limit. In other words, it could only be maintained for a certain period of time. After the time limit passed, it would take a while before it could be activated again. This was also the reason why he was unable to activate the jade plate's power when he obtained it earlier. Because the time limit hadn't expired yet, he handed it over to Crooked Teeth Chong and she had been experimenting with it. Naturally, she was able to easily activate the jade plate's power. This thing was indeed a good thing, especially in this kind of battlefield. With the jade plate's map, the team could easily find anyone they wanted to find. The jade plate continued to be controlled by Crooked Teeth Chong. Lu Yi led the team of 4 and flew in a certain direction. When he was investigating earlier, he noticed that many cultivators had gathered in that direction. If his guess was correct, a treasure must have appeared in that location. The battlefield of the chaotic assembly was very large. Not all treasures could be detected by the team when they appeared. Some treasures were too far away to be detected. Disregarding everything else, just the death substitution puppet and the jade plate were treasures that had appeared in this battlefield. The team of 5 was completely unaware of them. It could be foreseen that many people had obtained treasures by now, so if they encountered enemies again, they had to be careful. No one knew what kind of strange power those treasures had. After flying for more than an hour, they finally arrived at their destination. Looking from afar, they saw a speck of light. It was a treasure that had appeared, but they didn't know what it was. With that speck of light as the center, the figures of cultivators could be seen everywhere in a large area nearby. They were fighting in full swing. In this kind of environment, even if there were cultivators who just wanted to refine the pure energy that had descended along with the treasure, they couldn't because no one would let bystanders sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. As long as they entered this battlefield, they would all be opponents. This kind of liveliness was exactly what Lu Yi desired. So far, his plan had been proceeding very smoothly. He had recruited 4 temporary companions, all of whom had extraordinary appearances and were very pleasing to the eye. Moreover, the livelier it was, the more he could display the power of the formation plate. As usual, he led the 4 women into the battlefield from the edge of the battlefield. It was unstoppable. Most of the cultivators had 2 reactions when they saw this special team. First, they were happy because the overall cultivation of Lu Ye's team was very low. It could be said that they were at the bottom of all the teams, so it was easy to give people the illusion that they could easily crush them. But then, they were shocked because the figure of the spirit power turtle was obvious. As long as one was not blind, they could see that these people had formed a black tortoise formation. In such a battlefield environment, Lu Ye's team was the only one to be able to form a formation. Everyone realized that for such a team to survive until now and even dare to take the initiative to enter this battlefield, they must have something to rely on. However, there were always those who didn't believe in heresy and wanted to test the strength of the team. In the end, after a series of clashes, all of them left the field. The black tortoise, which was formed by spiritual energy, was like a ferocious beast that was roaming the sea. Wherever it went, it set off a storm of blood. Soon, Lu Yi noticed the existence of another team. There weren't many people in that team. It was a very ordinary 3-man team. However, the strength of these 3 people was very strong. Just like their small team, they killed wherever they went. There was no one who could fight against them at all. It was the first time Lu Yi had encountered such a strong team since the beginning of the chaotic battle assembly. That team obviously also noticed the existence of Lu Ye's team. When they exchanged glances, they tacitly avoided each other's areas. Both sides knew that now was not the time to compete with each other. It was more important to first work together to deal with the miscellaneous people. After dealing with the others, the 2 teams would have a chance to determine the winner. This could be considered a tacit understanding between powerhouses, but it was also the sorrow of cultivators who came to this battlefield to compete for treasures. After fighting for a while, Lu Ye's team ran into a bit of trouble. Although the black tortoise formation and Lu Ye's outstanding ability made it so that they could kill anyone in their way, there were always some guys who were able to cause some trouble for the team. Cultivators who cultivated to the constellation realm, who didn't have some special skills. The enemy they encountered this time wasn't strong, but the kind of person that Lu Yi was most wary of. Their strength wasn't that great, but they had strange treasures with strange powers. He had encountered many people like this when he fought in the arena before. Although he won in the end, it was a Pyrrhic victory. That treasure was something that looked like a chain, and it constantly changed between illusion and reality, making it very difficult for people to grasp its traces. Every time this chain struck down under the control of its master, it appeared very mysterious and unpredictable. If Lu Yi blocked it, then it would turn into illusion, and there was no way he could block it at all. If he did not block it, then what awaited the team would be a heavy blow, and it just so happened that this thing had the effect of shaking one's spirit. Fortunately, the team formed the Black Tortoise formation, which was good at defense. Although they were hit a few times, with Lu Ye's timely adjustment of the formation and the support of the Holy Protection Spirit rune, the team didn't lose any members. The opponent wasn't fighting alone. He had companions to support him, which was really difficult to deal with. In the end, the team endured the crazy attacks of the chain and killed the owner of the chain. Only then did they resolve the crisis. Although the treasure was amazing, in a cultivator's battle, one's own foundation was also very important. Without a strong enough foundation, it was also difficult to use the treasure. After dealing with the opponent here, Lu Yi immediately looked at Crooked Teeth Xiao. She was hit by the chain where she was just now. Although she had the protection of the formation, she still felt a little dizzy. "How is it?" Lu Yi asked with concern. Crooked Teeth Xiao shook her head. "It's nothing serious. Just take a break." There was no easy way to deal with the shaking of the soul. They could only wait for the spirit sea to stabilize. Just as Lu Yi was about to speak again, he suddenly felt a warning in his heart. His vision went past Crooked Teeth Xiao and looked into the distance behind her. A dot of light suddenly bloomed in the distance, accompanied by violent and intense spirit power fluctuations. Lu Ye's pupils instantly shrank to the size of a needle tip. Almost instinctively, he urged his spirit power to affect the formation and led the team of 4 to the side to hide. At the same time he moved, that dot of light suddenly exploded, turning into a huge light pillar, bombarding over thousands of miles away. Wherever it passed, it destroyed everything in its path. Lu Yi clearly saw that there were cultivators who couldn't dodge in time and were enveloped by the light pillar. Their entire bodies directly turned into nothingness without even a scream. Moreover, there was more than one cultivator who met this fate. Although he dodged in time, the abdomen of the spirit power tortoise was still grazed by the light pillar. The tortoise, which had been maintaining its tortoise form all this time, was directly missing a piece of its abdomen. It even caused the formation to collapse. 5 silhouettes flew out. Lu Ye's heart trembled. He knew that if they hadn't dodged in time just now, the lives of the 5 people in the team would have been lost here. Such a powerful attack was almost comparable to Yu Yao's attack. He really wanted to know what the hell that thing was. He urged his spirit power to guide the 4 women who were sent flying. With great difficulty, he stabilized the few who were still in shock and reassembled the formation. Only then did Lu Yi have the time to look in the direction of the source of the attack. At this moment, the chaos on the battlefield had already calmed down. With the arrival of that powerful attack, almost everyone was investigating the situation. Everyone was stunned by what they saw. This was because they saw a starship. A sinister-looking starship that looked like a shark was slowly cruising over from the depths of the starry sky. Its slow speed was just an illusion. In reality, it was very fast, and it brought with it an indescribable sense of oppression and horror. Everyone's hearts were filled with bitterness. Some people even cursed, "Why is this thing here again? It's not fair." The reason why he said, "again," wasn't because he had seen it before, but because there had been a precedent of starships appearing on the battlefield of the Chaos Assembly before. Even if a cultivator with great capital brought a starship in from the outside, they couldn't use it. This was because if starships could be used here, then the battlefield of the Chaos Assembly would inevitably become one where starships attacked each other. The cultivators who came from the major factions weren't like Lu Yi, who had no foundation. They had the opportunity to borrow starships from their elders. Not to mention others, Just take Chu Shun for example. If he wanted to, he could bring a starship in. To him, this wasn't a big deal. However, the Chaos Assembly had its own rules. Even if a cultivator brought a starship in from the outside, it couldn't be used here. The only starships that could be used here were those that belonged to the battlefield of the Chaos Assembly itself. There were all kinds of strange treasures that appeared, and starships were one of them. This was obviously a group of people who were extremely lucky to snatch a starship and then used it to fight in all directions. Before this, there must have been a lot of people who were unlucky enough to have met with calamity. To say that it was unfair was indeed a bit unfair. This was because a starship was too destructive. It wasn't something that a cultivator's flesh and blood could resist. Even a body cultivator couldn't. With such a starship in hand, the cultivators who controlled it had already secured victory in advance. However, this was a treasure that they snatched with their own ability. It was something that could only be used on the battlefield of the Chaos Assembly. Moreover, the price to use the starship's power wasn't small. Even if an ordinary cultivator managed to snatch it, they might not have the capital to use it. For example, that fierce attack just now cost at least 2,000 to 3,000 spirit jades. That was the price of the most ordinary spirit treasure. Therefore, whether it was fair or not depended on how one looked at it. Moreover, how could there be fairness in the cultivation world? Chu Shen had Ri Zhao as his backer, but 99% of the cultivators didn't. Was this fair? Now wasn't the time to care about this. As the starship approached, light began to bloom again. After seeing the terrifying power of this starship with their own eyes, the cultivators who were still fighting for the treasure didn't have the courage to stay. They were afraid that if they were accidentally hit by the starship, they wouldn't even know how they died. End of chapter. Chapter 1426. They all scattered like birds and beasts, and a cultivator shouted, "Everyone, let's work together to deal with it. Otherwise, we won't be able to fight at all." Although there weren't many cultivators present, there were still over 100 of them. If they could really work together, a single starship would be enough to deal with it. This was because in terms of specifications, this starship wasn't the particularly strong kind. Among all the starships, it should only be at the bottom. But as soon as that person's voice fell, the starship's light spread across hundreds of miles, enveloping him and his companions. When the light dissipated, the several figures had all turned into nothingness. This was undoubtedly the starship's pilot killing the chicken to warn the monkey. They also knew that they couldn't let this group of people really work together, so whoever dared to jump around would be killed first. As a result, no one dared to speak carelessly anymore. Lu Yi led the 4 women and fled into the distance, not even looking back. Although the team had been basically invincible since they started using the formation plate, Lu Yi wasn't arrogant enough to think that he would collide with a starship. The size of the two sides weren't on the same level, so there was no need or possibility for them to collide at all. As for the outcome of the battle royale, he actually didn't care very much, because along the way, he had already gained enough. Even if he really encountered a strong enemy and was eliminated, he wouldn't have any regrets. Moreover, his main goal in this battle royale was to display the twin spirit-connected formation plate. Although he didn't know how many pairs of eyes were watching him from outside, it definitely wouldn't be too few. The most important goal had already been achieved, and everything else was just minor details. After flying away from the previous battlefield, Caillou didn't go far when she transmitted her voice. "Senior brother Ife, someone is following us." Lu Yi had long discovered it, because the people following them didn't have any intention of hiding their tracks at all. It was the 3-person team that had performed extremely well on the battlefield just now. Lu Yi didn't know what they wanted to do, but looking at the posture of these 3 people, it didn't seem like they were looking for trouble. Of course, he wasn't afraid of them looking for trouble. These 3 people were indeed very strong, and Lu Yi reckoned that they were all on the rankings. Along the way, he hadn't seen anyone more powerful than these 3 people. But his side wasn't weak, either. If they really fought, it was obvious who would win and who would lose. Since he wasn't here to look for trouble, he should have something else to do. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi led the group to a floating continent hovering in the starry sky. He stood still, maintained the black tortoise formation, and turned around to look back. Sure enough, the 3 people flew over. It was a small team of 3, 2 men and 1 woman. They didn't look too old. The 3 of them landed not far away from Lu Ye's group. The leader sized up Lu Yi from head to toe before cupping his fists. Zhou Yuchuan. Sure enough, he had left his name on the rankings. If he remembered correctly, his ranking was still very high, and he had always maintained his position within the top 20. Those who chose their real names like this generally came from extraordinary backgrounds. They did not need to use aliases to conceal themselves. On the contrary, they could use their real names to make themselves famous, giving face to themselves and the forces behind them. Lu Yi placed his hand on the hilt of his saber and calmly replied, "Lu Zun." Zhou Yuchuan nodded slightly. As expected. He had previously guessed that Lu Yi should also be on the rankings, but he couldn't be sure which one it was. After all, they had never fought before, nor had they met before. Only now did he know the details of Lu Ye's background. "What do you want?" Lu Yi asked again. Zhou Yuchuan grinned. "Are you interested in working together to take care of that starship?" "You have a way to take care of that starship?" Lu Yi was curious. If it was something else, it would be fine, but if they could take care of the starship, it would be good for him too. Not to mention the points he could get, just the fact that they were all in the Chaos Assembly's battlefield meant that they couldn't avoid it forever. They would clash sooner or later. Zhou Yuchuan said, "The rules of the Constellation Palace are quite balanced. They will try to arrange opponents of similar strength in the arena battles. Even if it's a group battle, the overall power of the teams won't be too different. How can the Chaos Assembly be an exception? Since the starship has appeared, there must be something that can counter it." Lu Yi fell silent. He had to admit that Zhou Yuchuan's words made sense. He had been confused when he saw the starship. With such an unconventional weapon appearing, what was the point of the Chaos Assembly's cultivators fighting? Now, it seemed that the treasure that could counter the starship had appeared long ago and was taken by Zhou Yuchuan's team. They had probably been waiting for the starship to appear. However, it seemed that they didn't have enough people or power and needed Lu Ye's help. "Let me have a look first," Lu Yi said. Zhou Yuchuan didn't hide anything and directly took out a short spear. The short spear was covered with complicated patterns, and there were even lightning arcs dancing on the spear's body. As soon as the short spear appeared, it gave Lu Yi a great sense of danger. He immediately understood that this thing must be very powerful. However, just by looking at it, it looked like the Annihilation Lightning Spear he had seen in the 9 states. That was the sect treasure of the Heaven Yuan sect of the military state. He was certain that this short spear could definitely pose a threat to the starship. This was why Zhou Yuchuan dared to attack the starship. "What do you need me to do?" Lu Yi asked. Zhou Yuchuan said, "I want you guys to lead the starship to the ambush location. Then we can activate the power of this short spear and destroy the starship." Lu Yi narrowed his eyes. "That's not going to be easy." Luring the starship to the ambush location was easy to say, but not easy to do. Being chased by such a starship was like putting one's head on the line, and one's life could be in danger at any time. Zhou Yuchuan said, "If it was easy, I wouldn't have come to you guys. To be honest, when we got this thing, we knew that a starship would definitely appear. We've been looking for suitable people to join forces with, but unfortunately, we haven't found anyone until we met you guys." Lu Yi and the others' cultivation wasn't high, but their performance in the previous battle was very impressive. What caught Zhou Yuchuan's attention the most was that they had formed a black tortoise formation. This formation was known for its defense, so Zhou Yuchuan and the others felt that this team was the best choice. There was no need to find anyone else. If this team wasn't willing to join forces with them, then finding someone else would be suicide. They wouldn't be able to deal with the starship at all. Lu Yi pondered for a moment and asked, "How confident are we?" Zhou Yuchuan smiled confidently. "This treasure can only be used in the battlefield of the chaotic meeting, and it's specially used to restrain the starship. So, as long as you can lead the starship here, you'll have at least 80% confidence, if not 100% confidence." "It's too risky," Lu Yi said slowly. Zhou Yuchuan said, "But if we can destroy the starship, we'll reap a lot of benefits as well." During the battle royale, each of your spoils will only be worth 1 point, but if we can destroy the starship, we'll each receive at least 100 points even if we split the spoils evenly. Furthermore, if we can destroy the starship, there won't be anything that can pose a threat to our two teams. That's true, but we have to bear the risk after all. We can join forces, but we have to pay more. Zhou Yuchuan was slightly stunned. He didn't expect Lu Yi to put forward such a condition. Then he smiled and said, "My friend, name your price." Lu Yi looked at Xiao Dai and the others and then raised 2 fingers. 20,000 spiritual jades per person. Behind Zhou Yuchuan, a companion who had been silent all the time said angrily, "Why don't you just rob us?" Lu Yi said leisurely, "If you want us to bear the risk, you must show some sincerity. 20,000 spiritual jades per person is not much. Or we can trade. We'll activate the treasure, and you'll be responsible for leading the starship here. I'll give you 100,000 spiritual jades to share." That person said angrily, "The treasure is ours. Although you'll bear the risk, you're doing a business without any capital. We'll invest in this treasure." Lu Yi nodded. "You're right. But this thing can only be used in the battlefield of the chaotic meeting. Except for dealing with the starship, it doesn't seem to have any other uses. This thing is very powerful and I'm afraid it will cost a lot to use it. You can't use it to deal with practitioners." That person still wanted to argue, but Zhou Yuchuan raised his hand and said, "My friend, 10,000 spiritual jades per person. Although the 3 of us have good backgrounds, 10,000 spiritual jades is a lot. We can't afford more. In fact, we don't even have 50,000 spiritual jades. We can only use treasures as collateral." "You're so poor?" Lu Yi looked at them in surprise. He thought the 3 of them had good backgrounds and wouldn't lack spiritual jades. How come they were not as rich as him? He still had a lot of spiritual jades with him. Zhou Yuchuan looked a little embarrassed. "My friend, what are you talking about? Who doesn't use spiritual jades? Except for those who do business, no one has too many spiritual jades with them." That was true. Lu Yi nodded and said, "Then it's settled." It wasn't really necessary to ask for 20,000 spiritual jades. But as he said, they had to bear the risk, so there had to be some compensation. Otherwise, it would seem too cheap. After the 2 sides agreed, Zhou Yuchuan and the other 2 began to work. They gathered some spiritual jades and took out a few spiritual treasures as collateral. Lu Yi took them all. Dumbo and the others had no objection. Basically, all the spoils so far were with Lu Yi. Zhou Yuchuan looked around and pointed to a dead star next to him. "Let's choose there. My friend, you only need to find a way to lead the starship there and enter from this angle. Leave the rest to us." "One last question." Lu Yi looked at Zhou Yuchuan. "My friend, please. Since there are 3 of you, why don't you assign one of you to do this? Instead, you ask for help from outsiders?" Zhou Yuchuan laughed. "This spear is very powerful. It needs the 3 of us to work together to activate it. Where can we find extra hands?" "Understood." Lu Yi nodded. "You can start now. My friend, be careful." Zhou Yuchuan warned and led his 2 companions to fly to the dead star. End of chapter. Chapter 1427. After the 3 members of Zhou Yuchuan's team flew far away, Lu Yi turned to look at Dumbo and the others. "You guys find a place to hide nearby." Dumbo was stunned. "Don't you need our help?" She thought everyone would act together this time. After all, if they formed a formation, the defense would be stronger. Lu Yi shook his head. The Black Tortoise formation can't resist the starship's attack. This point had been confirmed just now, so he didn't intend to let Dumbo and the others get involved. After all, their strength was still too weak. Instead of acting with the help of the Black Tortoise formation, it was better to be alone, and they could be more flexible. But Dumbo still wanted to say something, but Lu Yi looked up at her. Dumbo couldn't help swallowing back her words. Although Lu Yi had been taking care of them since they joined hands, and he didn't show a strong performance, after all, Lu Yi was the backbone of the team, so he naturally meant what he said. "Then you take care of yourself. We'll wait for you over there." Dumbo pointed to a direction. Lu Yi nodded, turned around and rushed to the battlefield just now. The previously noisy battlefield was now completely silent. As the starship flew out of the sky, all the cultivators who had been arguing here just now had already flown away. The starship chased after several groups of people and eliminated them all. Then it turned around and came to the place where the treasure was. At this time, it was hovering beside the treasure. One of the practitioners got out of the starship and was standing beside the treasure. He raised his hand and pressed on the inhibition. Judging from his posture, he was breaking the inhibition. If no one disturbed him, it was not difficult for the practitioner to break the inhibition. It only took him more than 10 breaths to break the inhibition and take the treasure in it into his pocket. However, right at this moment, a blood-red light suddenly shot out from the side and pounced towards the location of the treasure at an extremely fast speed. It was Lu Yi who came back. He didn't choose to hide himself, because once he constructed the invisibility spiritual tattoo to cover himself, his speed would inevitably be greatly affected. If he wanted to lead the starship to the ambush point of Zhou Yuchuan's team, he had to do something to irritate the team that controlled the starship. For example, snatching the treasure. Time waits for no man. Naturally, he had to do it as fast as possible. Besides, the starship, such a big weapon of mass destruction, was basically equipped with many mysterious formations, which had a strong monitoring effect. His invisibility spiritual tattoo hadn't been deduced and improved, so it could run rampant in Jiuzhou. But in the starry sky, it might not work, and it might not be able to avoid the surveillance of the starship. The distance was quickly shortened. The practitioners there immediately noticed Lu Ye's trace. The ferocious starship quickly turned its direction. On one side of the hull, there was a black hollow cylindrical thing like a hollow cylinder aimed at Lu Ye's direction. In an instant, Lu Ye's whole body's skin tightened. How could he didn't know that the hollow cylindrical cylinder was a killing weapon of the starship? Yi, this. Kills team. Kill, they. However, the other party had no intention of activating this weapon, because activating this thing consumed a lot of spiritual jades. In addition, Lu Ye's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the constellation realm. The other party undoubtedly felt that there was no need to activate this thing. This was just to create a sense of crisis and distract him. A late-stage constellation realm practitioner dashed out of the starship and went straight to Lu Yi. Looking at this person's posture, he was also a saber cultivator. In the blink of an eye, the two figures collided. The saber light was sharp, and the spiritual power surged. The victor was decided. The late-stage constellation realm practitioner flew out with a stunned face and blood spurted out. He didn't understand how he was defeated. He originally thought that since his cultivation was higher, the other party would definitely not be his match. However, after the exchange, he realized that he was too naive. The other party was indeed only at the middle stage, but his saber technique was something that he couldn't compare to. What made him feel especially uncomfortable was that his late-stage spiritual power foundation couldn't gain the slightest advantage when clashing with the other party's spiritual power. Lu Yi didn't stop and continued to approach the treasure. At the same time, the practitioner who was breaking the restriction finally broke the outer restriction of the treasure and grabbed it in his hand. A sudden change occurred. Almost at the moment this person grabbed the treasure, a ghostly figure suddenly appeared behind him. Her fingers were like sabers, and she attacked like lightning. Lu Yi clearly saw that the back of this late-stage cultivator's heart had been pierced open, and a slender little hand reached out from his chest, holding a beating heart in her hand. Spectre. The corner of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. It was this woman again. Lu Yi hadn't seen her for a long time. Because of her bad behavior of following the team around and picking up scraps, Lu Yi had always been on guard against her. That was why she had specifically targeted her and taught her a lesson. Since then, the spirit had disappeared without a trace. Lu Yi thought that this woman had already left. Who knew that she had been wandering around nearby? At this time, she seized the opportunity and brazenly attacked, killing the enemy in an instant. This also made Lu Yi realize the difference between his own concealment and that of a ghost. The starship's surveillance array could definitely detect his whereabouts under concealment, but it didn't know anything about Spectre's arrival. The late-stage Constellation Realm practitioner who was ambushed by Spectre had a face full of fear and anger. At this level of cultivation, his vitality was vigorous. Even if his heart was dug out, he wouldn't die immediately. He knew that his time was up, so he turned around and fiercely threw a punch at Spectre. However, he was still seriously injured. Although this punch looked powerful, it didn't pose the slightest threat to Spectre. She easily dodged it and reached out to grab the treasure that the practitioner had just snatched. Then she floated back. From the moment she appeared to kill and steal the treasure, only a moment had passed. At this moment, Lu Yi was approaching her with his saber. The starship next to him also turned around again. The killing weapon exposed outside the starship was aimed at Spectre's location, and a light flashed. Earlier, this killing weapon was only used as a deterrent to Lu Yi, but now it was obviously going to be used for real. Spectre's expression changed drastically. Even if she was a ghost who appeared and disappeared unpredictably, she still felt a great sense of crisis when being targeted by such a killing weapon. Not to mention that Lu Ye's cold aura had locked onto her. She raised her hand and threw the treasure she had just snatched at Lu Yi. At the same time, her spiritual power surged and she shouted, "Run! Don't worry about me." As soon as her voice fell, her figure disappeared. Violent spiritual power fluctuations swept in all directions. Lu Yi clearly saw the starship's hull tremble slightly from the corner of his eye. A bright beam of light suddenly blasted out and penetrated the area where Spectre had just been. Spectre had obviously killed one of their companions. The cultivators on the starship were completely enraged. Lu Yi didn't know whether Spectre was dead or not, but he knew that he was in a bad situation. Spectre threw the treasure to him and shouted such misleading words, so the cultivators on the starship obviously thought that the two of them were in cahoots. Lu Yi hurriedly stuffed the treasure Spectre threw into his storage ring, then turned around and activated his blood escape technique. He turned into a blood-red light and ran as fast as he could. Although it was a little different from what he had planned, he had achieved his goal of enraging the starship. But Lu Yi still felt a little uneasy. A great sense of crisis lingered in his heart. No matter how fast Lu Yi ran, he couldn't get rid of it. He didn't need to look back to know that the starship would definitely chase after him. After obtaining such an unconventional killing weapon like the starship, anyone would think that they were invincible. However, in the encounter just now, not only had one of their companions been killed, but the treasure had also been stolen. How could they tolerate this? Spectre had disappeared, so the cultivators on the starship could only pour their boundless anger on Lu Yi. In terms of flying speed, Lu Yi couldn't be faster than the starship in any case. Especially in the field of the Chaos Assembly, there were drifting meteorites everywhere, which seriously hindered his straight-line escape speed. So even if he escaped first, the distance between him and the starship was rapidly shortened. Fortunately, thanks to these meteorites that could be seen everywhere, he had more space and leeway to move. With the cover of these meteorites, Lu Yi could always get rid of the starship's lock when his sense of crisis was the strongest, so that the starship's cannons couldn't really launch an attack. The dead star that Zhou Yuchuan and the others set up was not far away. Lu Yi didn't know whether they had arranged it well or not. If not, this trip would be troublesome. Far away, Dumbo and the other three hid in a meteorite belt, watching Lu Yi being chased. They all looked worried, but they couldn't intervene to help. They were full of bitterness and felt that Fa Wuzuan was shouldering too much. In the pursuit, the cultivators on the starship couldn't bear it anymore and fired the starship's cannons at Lu Yi. Several meteorites along the way were directly penetrated, forming a hollow passage. Even if Lu Yi had been aware of it and moved the moment the starship launched the attack, he was still swept by the aftermath. He immediately became dizzy and disoriented. Even though there were several layers of Holy Guard protection in the place where he was swept, he became numb. Awkwardly adjusting his body, he quickly rushed in the direction of the dead star. He felt that he couldn't hold on for too long. In less than 10 breaths, he would be caught up by the starship. By then, the situation would be bad. Fortunately, the dead star was already in front of him. He wasn't sure where Zhou Yuchuan and the others set up the ambush, so he just rushed straight there. The dead star was rapidly enlarging in his field of vision, and the terrain below could be clearly seen. The starship behind him was getting closer and closer, like a fierce ghost. Lu Ye's neck was a little shiny, as if there was an invisible ghost hand strangling his neck, which would take his life at any time. At this moment he suddenly saw that on the top of a barren mountain below, there was a purple light that began to bloom. It only bloomed for a moment, and then the purple light became extremely abundant. Taking a closer look, it was not a purple light, but a pure thunder jumping, as if there was a violent thunder pool on the top of the mountain below. Obviously, Zhou Yuchuan's team had arranged well. At this moment, seeing Lu Yi lead the starship over, they immediately activated the power of the short spear treasure. End of this chapter. Chapter 1428. Lu Yi felt even worse now. If the starship chasing after them was a vengeful ghost, then the lightning pool in front of them was a dragon's lair and a tiger's den. As expected, things weren't that simple. Zhou Yuchuan's team clearly intended to deal with him and the starship together. When they were discussing their cooperation, Lu Yi had already realized that such a situation might happen. He wasn't a fool. He naturally knew that if they really acted according to plan, he, as the bait that led the starship here, would be in the most danger. If he was familiar with Zhou Yuchuan and the others, they would think of ways to make arrangements to ensure his safety. However, he didn't know them at all. This was just a temporary cooperation, and the goal was to deal with the starship. Why would Zhou Yuchuan and the others care about his life or death? It could even be said that from the other side's point of view, dealing with Lu Yi together and also dealing with a strong enemy was simply killing two birds with one stone. At that time, Zhou Yuchuan and the others didn't mention this matter, and Lu Yi didn't ask either. There were some things that didn't need to be asked. He had never entrusted his safety to others' mercy. At the same time, a great danger loomed over him. There were no more meteorites around the Death Star, and Lu Ye's figure was completely exposed to the starship's attack. The top of the starship's cannon began to light up. At the same time, lightning arcs began to dance in the lightning pool at the top of the barren mountain below. Almost at the same time, the terrifying power in front of and behind him erupted. A bright and dazzling beam of light blasted the area where Lu Yi was. In an instant, his figure disappeared without a trace, as if his entire body had vaporized. In the 935th hall of the Constellation Palace, Chu Shen's face paled. He couldn't help but curse, "Despicable and shameless bastards, don't let me see you again in the future, or I'll teach you a lesson." The big boss died. This was a bolt from the blue for him. To be honest, there weren't many people that he admired in his life because he himself was a genius. Otherwise, even with the support of Rizhao and no lack of cultivation resources, he wouldn't have been able to ascend to the Constellation Palace at such a young age. A person like him had very high standards. Ordinary cultivators, even Yu Yao, would find it difficult to admire them without his approval. Yu Yao's cultivation was only higher, but it didn't mean that she was better than others. Fei Wuzuan was the first person he admired in his life. The way he addressed F.A. Wuzuan as Big Boss, he was completely convinced. The feeling of being invincible by F.A. Wuzuan's side was really good. If it wasn't for his bad luck that he was eliminated early on, he would have been able to follow the Big Boss and be in the limelight. However, such a person whom he admired so much and who he thought had an extremely bright future actually died just like that. Chu Shen's heart ached, his heart grieved, his heart turned cold. He only felt that the current atmosphere in the cultivation world was too bad. There was no trust between people at all. In addition, the Big Boss had promised to give him the disc array after the chaotic war was over. Now that the Big Boss was dead, the disc array was probably out of the question. Chu Shen was disheartened and furious. Most of the cultivators who had placed their attention on Lu Yi also sighed. They had seen with their own eyes how F.A. Wuzuan's team had defeated the strong with the weak. They had killed so many powerful teams that they couldn't even fight back. They had thought that after this battle, F.A. Wuzuan's name would spread far and wide. Who would have thought that such a monstrous character would die so early? Although they felt that Zhou Yuchuan's team's actions were not very proper, this was the way of cultivation. There were risks everywhere. If there was anyone to blame, F.A. Wuzuan could only blame himself for not being cautious enough. On the other hand, Although the leaders of the various large factions who wanted to buy the disc array from Fa Wuzuan felt that it was a pity, they didn't care too much. Fa Wuzuan was dead, but the disc array had always been in the hands of one of the women in the team. When the chaotic war was over, they just had to look for this woman. They were only glad that Fa Wuzuan had the foresight to not let the 4 women follow him. Otherwise, the disc array would have been destroyed by now. In the Constellation Palace, everyone had their own thoughts. Under the attention of countless pairs of eyes, when Lu Ye's figure disappeared, a thick pillar of lightning shot up from the mountain peak below. It was like a violent lightning dragon, shaking its head and wagging its tail as it charged towards the starship. The cultivators on the starship were still immersed in the joy of avenging their dead companions. They didn't expect to encounter danger in the blink of an eye. A cultivator controlled the array and activated the starship's defense at the last moment. In an instant, a layer of light enveloped the entire starship. The lightning dragon came crashing down, but it didn't have the terrifying force that they had imagined. Instead, it exploded in an instant, turning into slithering lightning snakes that wrapped around the entire starship. The seemingly indestructible defense that enveloped the starship was like snowflakes under the scorching sun, quickly melting away under these slithering lightning snakes. The lightning snakes didn't disappear and continued to slither. In just a moment, the arrays and treasures on the starship were all destroyed. The huge starship was like a bird with broken wings, falling straight from the sky. A few figures scurried out in a sorry state. Among them was the late-stage weapon cultivator who had fought with Lu Yi before. In the barren mountains below, Zhou Yuchuan's team, including the 2 men, were all pale. It was a sign that they had used up too much of their energy. The short spear treasures were extremely powerful. Activating them naturally consumed a lot of energy. Even though they had set up arrays in advance to help, it had almost drained all of their spiritual energy. How did they get here so quickly? The man who had argued with Lu Yi before spoke. The plan had succeeded, but it wasn't a complete success. This was because in their plan, it wasn't as simple as destroying the enemy's starship. They were prepared to get rid of the starship and the cultivators driving it as well. However, their plans couldn't keep up with the changes. They didn't expect Lu Yi to arrive so quickly, causing their arrangements to be incomplete. This led to the situation where the enemy's starship had failed, but the crew was still intact. On the other hand, 2 of them had almost lost their ability to fight. Only the woman in the team was still in peak condition. It wasn't because the woman was stronger, but because Zhou Yuchuan didn't let her participate in activating the short spear's power. That was why she could maintain her combat ability. This was the result of Zhou Yuchuan's caution. It had to be said that this was an extremely wise decision. Otherwise, the 3 of them would be just lambs waiting to be slaughtered. "Recover!" Zhou Yuchuan shouted in a low voice. Then, he turned to look at the woman. "Little Ru, I'll leave them to you." The cold-looking woman didn't say a word. In a flash, she stood in front of the 2 of them and looked up at the sky. In that direction, a few figures dashed out of the starship. The late-stage weapon cultivator in the lead was coldly sizing up Zhou Yuchuan and the other 2. At this point, how could they not know that they had fallen into Lu Ye's trap? Killing them to steal their treasures was a lie. His real plan was to anger them and lure them here to destroy their starship. This team wasn't surprised that a treasure that could restrain starships would appear in this chaotic battlefield. They had always been vigilant and prepared. However, some things couldn't be avoided just by being vigilant. In the situation just now, they had no other choice but to chase after Lu Yi until he died. Therefore, they felt that Zhou Yuchuan's team, Lu Yi, and the ghost cultivator who had killed them and dug out their hearts were all in cahoots. Fortunately, they had killed 2 of them one after another. Now, all they had to do was take care of the 3 of them. If Zhou Yuchuan and the other 2 were unharmed, they naturally wouldn't be a match for them. However, at this moment, only one of the 3 of them had the strength to fight. The cultivators who jumped out of the starship saw the situation at a glance. What was there to hesitate about? Under the lead of the late-stage weapon cultivator, they didn't hesitate to attack Zhou Yuchuan and the others. The female cultivator called Little Ru's face became serious. She raised her hands and 2 spirit treasures hovered beside her, One of them looked like a palm leaf fan, while the other was a copper ring. However, this copper ring was covered in raging flames. Seeing that the enemies were coming at her aggressively, the female cultivator immediately urged the power of her spirit treasure. In an instant, the copper ring was covered in flames. Rings of fire flew out to meet the enemies. She raised her hand and grabbed the palm leaf fan. As she fanned it fiercely, an invisible wind swept out. The wind increased the intensity of the fire, causing the rings of fire to suddenly become bigger. The flames also became fiercer, forming an extremely tight defense in an instant. The attacking enemies wanted to force their way through, but they couldn't break through for the time being. They immediately understood that this female cultivator wasn't an ordinary late-stage constellation realm cultivator. She was definitely a powerhouse who had left her name on the rankings. This made the team led by the late-stage weapon cultivator anxious and excited. They were anxious because if they couldn't break through the enemy's attack in a short period of time, then this female cultivator's other two companions had the possibility of recovering. When that time came, the situation would definitely be even worse. They were excited because they really hadn't fought with a powerhouse on the rankings before. If they could eliminate the other party, then they would have something to brag about in the future. If they were really familiar with each other, they could still take some risks and make a risky move. However, they were also a team formed at the last minute. They didn't have tight cooperation between each other, so they could only fight steadily. Although the female cultivator was impressive, she was ultimately alone. Even if the other party didn't cooperate, their numbers were still there. Gradually, the situation became a little bad for little Ru. And just as this battle was getting anxious, Zhou Yuchuan, who was seizing the time to meditate and recover, suddenly felt something and opened his eyes. In the next instant, his eyes widened, and an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. In that direction, there was a person holding a long saber, strolling over leisurely. Half of his clothes were dyed red with blood. It was obvious that he had been injured before. However, judging from his current aura, he was fine. Zhou Yuchuan was stunned. He really wanted to ask, shouldn't you be dead? But he appeared here perfectly fine. It was obvious that he had used some method to escape the calamity. Zhou Yuchuan's companions also opened their eyes. When they saw Lu Yi, they immediately realized that things were not good. They didn't have good intentions towards Lu Ye's team before. Now that he wasn't dead and instead appeared here, it was obvious that he wasn't here to have a heart-to-heart talk with them. Following Lu Ye's sudden appearance, even the team that was fighting Little Ru couldn't help but slow down their movements. Then they saw a puzzling scene. Lu Ye's figure suddenly moved like a fleeing rabbit. He charged towards Zhou Yuchuan and the others with a fierce aura, as if there was some great hatred between them. Weren't they together? End of chapter. Chapter 1429. Sensing Lu Ye's murderous intent, Zhou Yuchuan frowned. In the end, he chose to withdraw. The moment his figure disappeared, his face was full of helplessness. Putting aside the fact that he had exhausted himself in order to activate the power of the short spear, he didn't have much combat strength left at the moment. Lu Yi himself had also left his name on the rankings. Zhou Yuchuan naturally wouldn't underestimate him just because he was only at the middle stage. Before his figure disappeared, Zhou Yuchuan transmitted a message. I hope we have a chance to have a fair fight in the future. He was undoubtedly a little unconvinced because his ranking on the rankings was much higher than Fa Wuzuan's. He was confident that if both of them were in peak condition, Fa Wuzuan wouldn't be his opponent in a one-on-one fight. But now, he was forced to withdraw from the Chaos Society. He couldn't help but feel helpless. When Zhou Yuchuan's figure disappeared, his male companion also disappeared. They were both shrewd people. They had treated Lu Yi like that just now, so it was natural that Lu Yi wanted to kill them. As the saying goes, karma goes around, retribution goes around. They couldn't blame others for this. In the face of such a murderous person, if he didn't run, should he stay here and wait for death? In the blink of an eye, only Ma Xiaoru was left in the team of 3. At this moment, she was still urging her 2 spirit treasures to resist the attacks from the starship team. As Zhou Yuchuan and his other companion left, Lu Ye's aura naturally locked onto her. A pincer attack. Ma Xiaoru felt very uncomfortable. She really couldn't understand how the situation had developed to this point. Her plan had been very good. Although she was a woman, she was also a decisive person. She knew that she couldn't stay in this place for long. Her figure flickered, and she immediately tried to escape. However, Lu Ye's figure was like a maggot in a tarsal bone. She was a magic cultivator, and now she was being targeted by a weapon cultivator like Lu Yi. How could she escape? Although she tried to cast spells to try and stop Lu Ye's advance, it didn't have much effect. The enemy's advance was very strong and domineering. It wasn't something her spells could stop. In a moment, he caught up. After a moment of confrontation, the woman had no choice but to withdraw in a sorry state. Before she left, her eyes were filled with fear. She had seen the power of Lu Ye's team before, but that was with the power of the battle array. She thought that no matter how strong Fa Wuzuan was, he couldn't be too strong. However, after fighting with him, she found that she was no match for him. Especially when a magic cultivator like her was close to a weapon cultivator, she couldn't move. While they were fighting, the Starship team didn't make a move because they were confused. They couldn't figure out what was going on with these people. They seemed to be in the same group, so why were they fighting among themselves? It wasn't until Ma Xiaoru's figure disappeared that Lu Yi was the only one left that the situation became clear. The Starship team rushed toward Lu Yi without hesitation, especially the late-stage soldier cultivator. His expression was particularly fierce. He had suffered a loss at Lu Ye's hands before, but at that time, he was alone. Now that his companions were by his side, how could he be afraid of a mere mid-stage soldier? He was ready to regain the face he had lost earlier. But after the real confrontation, they found that they had underestimated the situation. This guy, who was also a weapon cultivator and also used a saber, was only at the middle stage. His body moved so fast that they couldn't stop him even if they worked together. What was more terrifying was his strong attack. Often, the moment he passed by, his companions would be seriously injured. Instead, their attacks were all blocked by their opponents using some sort of indescribable method to activate some sort of defense. After Lu Ye's figure passed by several times, the team was directly crippled. In the Constellation Hall, Chu Shen's mood went through ups and downs. He felt that it was too exciting. He didn't see how Lu Yi survived such a crisis, but now that he thought about it, there was something wrong. Because when the starship's cannon bombarded Lu Ye's body, his whole body turned into nothingness. This was obviously not normal. It was understandable that a cultivator turned into nothingness, but Fa Wuzuan's saber was not so easily vaporized. Chu Shen was a little late. He realized that Fa Wuzuan used some method to leave the place when the starship's cannon was about to hit him. The boss didn't die. Not only did he not die, but he also killed everyone. This was good. This person is invincible. A voice came from the side. Chu Shen hurriedly nodded in agreement. Many people agreed with this. Originally, Zhou Yuchuan's team's overall strength was enough to compete with Fa Wuzuan's team. Even though Fa Wuzuan's team formed the Black Tortoise Formation, their overall cultivation was still weak. If they really fought, it was hard to tell who was stronger and who was weaker. Not to mention, there was also a starship that could move unhindered in all directions, which was something that no team could contend against alone. But as far as he could see, the starship had been destroyed, and the team was in danger too. Zhou Yuchuan's team had been wiped out neatly. In the entire battlefield, who could stop Fa Wuzuan's team's ferocious momentum? Unless there was a cultivator who could get some sharp treasures in the battlefield. What was more frightening was that this team had a map of the battlefield. Any attempt at concealment would be useless in front of the map. Therefore, Fa Wuzuan's team would definitely go out and search for the remaining cultivators. They would constantly eliminate them and increase their own victory. In this chaotic battle, this team was bound to be the biggest winner. On the Death Star, Lu Yi had eliminated the whole starship team. He had to admit that the Holy Guard was quite useful in this level of confrontation. In particular, he didn't have any delay in activating the Holy Guard's spiritual tattoo, and there was no possibility of failure. Even if the enemy's attack was strong, he could add several layers of Holy Guard protection to himself in an instant. Therefore, as long as the enemy wasn't too strong or too many, he could be unharmed with the Holy Guard alone. He had already sent a message to Dumbo and the others, asking them to come and join him. Since he had nothing to do, Lu Yi took out the treasure that Ghost had thrown to him. After Spectre snatched the treasure, she immediately tossed it to Lu Yi. To be honest, Lu Yi didn't quite understand what was going on. Spectre didn't have to do that if she wanted to divert the attention of others, because with her concealment, the Starship team could only target her. But she did that, so Lu Yi had a bad feeling. After checking it at this moment, he found it was true. The thing in his hand was not a treasure at all, but a kind of cheap ore. It was shining brightly, and there were traces of polishing on the surface. Obviously, Ghost had polished it in advance, making it look like a treasure. In fact, she had replaced the treasure the moment she got it. Lu Yi wanted to crush the ore, but he put it away in the end. Ghost, this woman, was too much. He had to find a chance to teach her a lesson. Dumbo and the other three quickly arrived at the place. Seeing that Lu Yi was intact, they all felt relieved. They didn't ask about the situation of the battle just now. Since Lu Yi was here, but the others were nowhere to be seen, the result was obvious. The 5 people gathered again. Lu Yi took the map of the battlefield from Crooked Teeth, looked for an area with a lot of practitioners, and then took the lead to fly there. There was a time interval when the map of the battlefield was used, so there was no way to check it all the time. But it was enough. Every once in a while, Crooked Teeth would check the map of the battlefield, looking for the approximate location of the practitioners nearby. After confirming the direction, the team would rush there, and they would gain something every time. They searched and killed all the way, and no one knew how many teams had suffered. But it had to be said that the teams that could still survive at this time had good overall strength, unlike at the beginning, when the strength was mixed with good and bad, and the gap was huge. Because the Battle Royale had basically reached the late stage, the weak ones had been eliminated. Lu Ye's team was the only anomaly. On the surface, their cultivation was the weakest, but in fact, they were the strongest team. In the previous battles, it was actually very difficult for practitioners to gain something at this stage, because the battlefield was too large. After the number of practitioners was reduced, they were scattered, and the frequency of encountering each other was greatly reduced. Even if there were teams who held the map of the battlefield to look for people, they couldn't gain much if they weren't strong enough. After a few days, a magnificent and ethereal aura suddenly swept across the entire battlefield of the Battle Royale. At the same time, all the surviving practitioners had a realization. The Battle Royale was going to end in half a day. This was obviously the rule of the Constellation Hall. The Battle Royale was different from the battles Lu Yi had encountered in the past. The end of the Battle Royale wasn't marked by a clear winner. Instead, it would end when the number of cultivators left on the battlefield was reduced to a certain number. At the end of the battle, all the remaining cultivators would be considered the victors. Because the battlefield was too large, it was impossible for practitioners to fight to the last person. This number was generally the ratio of 50 to 50. Sensing the message conveyed by this aura, Lu Yi stopped and raised his hand to signal Crooked Teeth Qiao. Crooked Teeth Qiao understood and handed over the map of the battlefield. Lu Yi took it and poured his spiritual energy into it. After a brief inspection, he found that there were about 600 cultivators left on the battlefield. According to the ratio of 1 to 5, there were around 30,000 cultivators participating in this chaotic battle. In just half a month's time, only 600 people remained out of the original 30,000. From this, it could be seen how intense the battle was. It was unknown how many cultivators were buried here forever. Lu Yi glanced at the location of the cultivators closest to them and gave up on the idea of searching for enemies. They had already gained enough from this chaotic meeting. There was no need to stir up a storm of blood in the last half of the day. The remaining cultivators would definitely have the same thought. They had all persevered until now with great difficulty and obtained the final victory. They would be able to reap the benefits in just half a day. Who would still want to fight and kill? End of chapter. Chapter 1430. After a while, under Lu Ye's proposal, the 5 people of the team came to a nearby desolate star and waited silently. After the 4 women fought side by side this time, Their friendship was already very deep. What was rare was that the four of them were all at the early stage of the constellation, so they had more in common. They gathered together and chattered like four skylarks. Lu Yi took all the gains from this chaotic battle, and then divided them into 5 parts. He called the 4 women and pointed to the 5 parts in front of him. Everyone choose one. The 4 women looked at each other, and finally Dumbo said, "Senior fellow apprentice F.A., we have discussed before that we don't want the gains this time. If it weren't for you we would cut the crap, 1 for each." Lu Yi naturally knew what Dumbo wanted to say. It was nothing more than that without him, the 4 of them couldn't have persisted until now. Maybe they would have been eliminated early, and their lives would be in danger. But it was Lu Yi who took the lead to form such a special team, so they could be invincible and kill in all directions. There were a lot of things in front of them, but compared with the gains they got, they were nothing. It should be known that what they could share this time was not only the visible material objects in front of them, but also the accumulated chips and the corresponding mystic light rewards. Especially the mystic light rewards, which were the most important for them, because it could directly promote their cultivation. But for Lu Yi, the 4 women fought with him for half a month, and he used them to show the power of the twin chi-connected branch formation. Since they shared weal and woe, they naturally should enjoy the happiness together. This was the principle of living in the world. Lu Yi's voice was a bit loud, and it was urged by spiritual power, so Dumbo couldn't help but tremble. After getting along with each other for a while, she had already been used to Lu Yi's words. Although there was only a small gap between their cultivation, Dumbo felt that she was more nervous when facing this master than facing Sunshine. Lu Yi asked her to take, so she could only take. With a touched expression, she casually chose one. Looking at her posture, even if Lu Yi asked her to give herself to him, she wouldn't even frown. She didn't expect that this time's battle royale would have such a delightful result. When she first signed up for the battle royale, it was just a matter of chance. After entering, she regretted it a little. When Lu Yi eliminated her temporary companions and forced her to join, she thought she had encountered some bad people. She didn't expect that it would be a blessing in disguise. Dumbo took the lead, and the other 3 girls also chose one each. Lu Yi divided the loot evenly. None of them were more expensive, and none of them were cheaper, so it didn't matter which one was chosen. In half a month's time, the number of cultivators eliminated by the teams numbered close to 1,000. Not all of them were killed. Some of them saw that the situation was not good and decided to withdraw. Thus, they did not leave behind any spoils of war. Even so, each of these spoils of war was worth about 50 to 60,000 spirit jades. For the early stage of the constellation realm, this was not a small fortune. Of course, Lu Yi didn't share the spirit jades and treasures that Zhou Yuchuan had given to Lu Yi as collateral. The 4 women hadn't done anything at that time, and he had single-handedly done it, so it was understandable that he took a share of the spoils. "Let's go." Lu Yi waved his hand. The 4 girls said goodbye to Lu Yi one by one, and they were reluctant to part with him. Before leaving, Dumbo left the formation plate, which was given to her by Lu Yi after all. The desolate star was very big. The 5 of them each occupied a place and waited silently. Half a day later, the battle royale ended, and there were Xian lights falling from the sky. Lu Yi's spirit was shaken, because the amount of profound light he obtained this time was much more abundant than any of the previous times. Among all the battles he had experienced before, the most abundant profound light reward was when he met Chu Shen for the first time. Refining the last profound light was equivalent to refining 300 spiritual jades. But this time, even Lu Yi didn't know how to estimate it. Even if he activated the power of the talent tree to refine, it took him more than half a day to completely refine the Xian light. He could clearly feel the improvement of his cultivation, and the most obvious sign was that the refining of the essence of bone marrow had made a lot of progress. He didn't worry that this refining would expose the secret of his fast cultivation, because the moment the battle royale ended, the practitioners outside could no longer observe the situation here. He spread out his divine thoughts and could sense the breath of Dumbo and the others. Obviously, they were refining the Xian lights. The benefits they got should not be as big as his. After all, he was the main force of the team. But for them, it was still a very rich reward. If they were lucky, it was not impossible for them to promote to the middle stage of the constellation realm. Of course, Dumbo didn't need to. Louis didn't stay any longer. With a thought, he left the battlefield of the Battle Royale. In Hall 935, Chu Shen's face was filled with displeasure, because at this moment, he could feel that many practitioners were paying attention to him. Even if he didn't know these practitioners, Chu Shen could know what they were doing. Undoubtedly, they were the stewards of the constellation realm of the big forces. Because he had shouted in public that Fa Wuzuan was his big brother, some people spread the news. So, if these people wanted to get in touch with Fa Wuzuan, they must have a suitable channel. The first problem they had to face was where to find Fa Wuzuan. There was no doubt that Fa Wuzuan should be refining the Xian light at this moment and enjoying the fruits of victory. But he would come out eventually. But even if he came out with so many halls, who knew where he would appear? So, the purpose of them staring at Chu Shen was not for Chu Shen, but for Fa Wuzuan. This made Chu Shen very annoyed. Everyone was thinking about the formation plate, but the formation plate was already Chu's. Thinking about the formation plate was the same as thinking about Chu Shen. He only hated that his cultivation wasn't high enough, and he couldn't fight in the Constellation Palace. Otherwise, he would beat up all these eyesores. He wasn't worried that Fa Wuzuan would go back on his word. The big shot was such a generous person, and he had just shared the spoils with his companions. How could he go back on his word? In this half a month, he had taken the time to talk with Jiao Yan. Once he got the formation plate, Jiao Yan would no longer restrict him in the Wanxiang Galaxy. So, to him, the formation plate wasn't just a formation plate. It was the taste of freedom, the taste of his 20 years of desire. No one could stop his pursuit of freedom. Just as he was feeling angry, a sound came from the formation plate. The message was very simple, only a number. 1632. Chu Shen took a look and was overjoyed. This was Fa Wuzuan's message. He didn't understand why the big shot had come out so quickly. According to his estimation, it was normal for Fa Wuzuan to stay in the battlefield for 7 or 8 days. After all, he had to refine the Xian light. He guessed that the big shot didn't want to waste time. He immediately set off for hall number 1632. When the cultivators who had been watching Chu Shen saw this, they were all stunned. Then, they hurriedly sent out a message to search for Chu Shen. Right now, he was the only person who could directly contact Fa Wuzuan. They could not lose him. But soon, a surprising piece of news came. Fa Wuzuan appeared in the 1632nd palace. The news spread very quickly. Due to the chaotic battle before, Fa Wuzuan could be said to be the most famous constellation realm cultivator in the entire Constellation Palace. Who knew how many people had personally seen him maneuver in all directions during the chaotic battle? Naturally, they could not be more familiar with his appearance and figure. Therefore, as soon as Lu Yi appeared, he attracted the attention of many cultivators. Many unfamiliar faces looked at him with respect, and some even greeted him as if they were close friends. There were even beautiful female cultivators who took the initiative to ask for his musical imprint. When Lu Yi saw this, he knew that his plan was going smoothly. His various schemes in the chaotic assembly had attracted the attention of many cultivators. The formation plate's fame had been completely spread. "Big brother!" A familiar voice sounded. It was even more enthusiastic than before. Lu Yi looked up and saw Chu Shen hurriedly walking over. He didn't even call him big brother. Lu Yi didn't mind. He nodded at him and handed over the formation plate. Chu Shen's eyes widened. The eyes of many cultivators around him also widened. Lu Yi frowned. He seemed to have underestimated the effect of his previous plan. It seemed that the formation plate's fame was even greater than he had expected. Chu Shen quickly stepped forward and took the formation plate. He smiled like a flower. "Big brother, how could I accept this?" Although he said he was embarrassed, he quickly put the formation plate into his storage ring. In an instant, many gazes were filled with envy. After witnessing the various battles in the chaotic battle, the cultivators naturally knew that Fa Wuzuan's individual strength was indeed not bad. However, this time, his team was able to achieve such a good result because of the formation disc. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for him to achieve such amazing results alone, no matter how strong he was. In an environment like the chaotic assembly, a black tortoise formation with powerful defensive power played a huge role. If such a treasure were to be sold outside, it would be worth at least 1,000,000 spirit jades. Fei Wuzuan had actually given it to someone else. They didn't know if calling Fei Wuzuan Big Brother would give them any benefits. Chu Shun put away the formation plate and his heart fell to the ground. His expression became serious and he said, "Big Brother, little brother was blind before and didn't see how valuable this thing was. Now I know that its value is beyond imagination. Big Brother, if you have any other requests, please state them. If I can satisfy them, I won't refuse." According to the original agreement, Chu Shun would help Lu Yi find a spot to enter the chaotic assembly in exchange for the formation plate. Now, he was just fulfilling the previous agreement. However, Chu Shun wasn't used to taking advantage of others. If it weren't for the formation plate being so important to him, he wouldn't have casually accepted it. End of this chapter. Chapter 1431. In comparison, a spot for the Chaos Assembly was insignificant. It was not enough to make up for Lu Ye's loss. Chu Shun wanted to befriend Fa Wuzuan, so he naturally had to make up for it. In any case, Zhu Yan would help him deal with whatever he promised. We'll talk about it later. Lu Yi did not refuse because he felt that he might really need Chu Shun's help. He raised his head and looked behind Chu Shun. At this moment, there was a group of people standing behind Chu Shun. These people had undoubtedly rushed here after hearing the news. They were all looking at him eagerly, and there were even more people on their way here. "Is there something you need?" Lu Yi asked. It would have been better if he hadn't asked, but as soon as he did, the scene immediately became chaotic. A group of people cupped their hands and greeted him, calling him fellow Taoist F. Some said they had a business deal they wanted to discuss with Lu Yi, while others said they had something they wanted to ask Lu Yi about. There were even some people who wanted to recruit him, and they generously said that he could name any conditions he wanted. Their attitudes were sincere and eager, as if they were thirsty for talent. Lu Yi raised his hand and stopped them. One by one, the group of people looked at each other. No one was willing to give in so easily, and the scene became even more chaotic. Lu Yi looked at the oldest old man in the crowd. "You speak first. Everyone else, shut up." The old man did not expect to be treated like this. He was happy for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, there are many people here. I wonder if we can find a secluded place. This old man has something to, just say it here." Lu Yi interrupted him. He had a rough idea of what this person wanted to do. The old man had a difficult expression, but when he saw that Fa Wuzuan had no room for discussion, he knew that he could not force him. Fortunately, everyone's intentions were the same, so there was no point in avoiding them. He immediately said, "This old man wants to ask, the formation plate that fellow Taoist gave out just now should not be the only one, right?" The reason for this inference was that the formation plate looked ordinary on the surface. It did not look like something valuable at all. Moreover, Lu Yi had given it to Chu Shen without batting an eyelid. If it really was the only one, no one would be willing to give it up. Of course not. Lu Yi nodded. The old man's expression brightened, and the cultivators who came specially for the array disc also showed joy. If it was a unique set, then they would have to find a way to get the array disc from Chu Shen. However, Chu Shen's identity was special. He was backed by the Che Ling boundary and was a native cultivator of the Wanxiang star system. It was not easy to deal with him. "How many are there?" the old man asked. The group of people perked up their ears, wanting to hear the answer, but Lu Yi had no intention of answering. He just looked at the old man indifferently, not saying a word. The old man smiled faintly. "Fellow Taoist Fa, there's no need to be nervous. I'm the manager of the Morning Essence Chamber of Commerce. The reason I'm asking this is because I want to buy a disc array from you. As for the price, that's easy." The Vientiane Chamber of Commerce wasn't the only one in the Vientiane galaxy. However, in comparison, the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce was the most famous. After all, They were a local chamber of commerce and had the greatest advantage. However, other than the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce, some powerful galaxies basically had their own chambers of commerce here. The Morning Essence Chamber of Commerce should be an industry under the Morning Essence Galaxy. It used the entire galaxy as its backing and support to do some transactions with other galaxies or cultivators. Many galaxies had their own specialties. Therefore, even if they were not as big or strong as the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce, they still had their own unique competitiveness. As soon as the old man finished speaking, someone else said, "The Frost Wolf Chamber of Commerce also wants to buy a disc array from you." And the Sky Serene Chamber of Commerce. The scene became chaotic again. After everyone calmed down and voiced their requests, Lu Yi nodded slightly and glanced at the crowd. It seems that everyone wants to buy the disc array. He made a thoughtful expression. How about this? Since everyone has the same idea, let's hold an auction. The group of Chamber of Commerce managers frowned when they heard this. This was undoubtedly the scene they didn't want to see the most. However, Fa Wuzuan was no fool. He naturally understood the principle of hoarding rare goods. Since so many of them had come to him to buy the disc array, Fa Wuzuan obviously wanted to maximize his own benefits. An auction was the best way. They sighed inwardly, knowing that they couldn't dissuade him. In the end, the old man from the Morning Essence Chamber of Commerce asked, "Fellow Taoist, when will the auction be held and where will it be held?" "It will be in this Constellation Hall," Lu Yi said. "Hall number 88. It's spacious there. As for the time, it will be in 3 days." 3 days? The group of people was shocked when they heard this. Someone said, "Fellow Taoist, isn't the time too tight?" This was undoubtedly because they weren't strong enough. They were afraid that they wouldn't be able to gather enough spirit jades to auction in 3 days. Some people wanted to persuade Lu Yi, but Lu Yi ignored them. His figure flickered and disappeared, heading to another hall. The group of people left behind frowned. Soon news spread out. Although they didn't know how many spirit jades were needed to auction the disc array, the more the better. This place was too far away from the 10,000 Elephant Sea. There wasn't enough time to transport more spirit jades over in 3 days. They could only think of other ways. Almost every Galaxy Chamber of Commerce was determined to get the disc array because the managers of these chambers of commerce had seen with their own eyes the terrifying effect the disc array played in the chaotic war. It could be said that this was an epic-making treasure, something that had never appeared before. If this object could be cracked and refined in large quantities, it would definitely have a huge impact on the entire cultivation world. Some people took the unconventional approach and began to worm their way into being friends with Chu Shen. Chu Shen ignored them and disappeared not long after Lu Ye's figure disappeared. In another hall, Lu Yi and Chu Shen reunited. Lu Yi arranged a spirit array to conceal their figures so that they wouldn't be disturbed again. Lu Yi reminded Chu Shen, and Chu Shen nodded repeatedly. He had previously said that if Lu Yi had any requests, he wouldn't refuse as long as he could satisfy them. Lu Ye's request wasn't a big deal at all, so he naturally agreed. He was even a little expectant because he faintly realized that he might be involved in a major event that would leave his name in the annals of history. While the two of them were discussing, Fa Wuzuan would hold an auction in the 88th hall in 3 days. The news of the mysterious disc array being auctioned on the spot had quickly spread. An eternally strange story. Cultivators were no stranger to auctions. Powerful chambers of commerce would often hold auctions of various sizes. Generally speaking, some novel and good things would appear in auctions, attracting people's attention and often selling for a good price. However, it had always been the chambers of commerce of a certain galaxy that acted as the main auctioneer. There had never been an individual who held an auction because a single person didn't have the strength to do so, nor did they have enough treasures to hold an auction. Forcing an auction would only make a fool of themselves. However, if Fa Wuzuan held this auction, it seemed to be reasonable. Although there was only one miraculous array disc in the auction, there were many people who wanted it. Moreover, they were all chambers of commerce from various galaxies. Cultivators knew how powerful these chambers of commerce were. Therefore, it was foreseeable that this auction would be a fierce battle between dragons and tigers. The various chambers of commerce would shed all pretenses of cordiality. The 88th hall was special to begin with because the number of people gathered in this hall was much higher than other halls. Moreover, it had always been used as a hall for business. This time, it was directly pushed to the heart of the storm. When the news spread, countless people rushed to the 88th hall. Most of them were there to watch the show. It would be a pity to miss such a show. There were also Chamber of Commerce managers waiting there in advance to prevent too many people from entering. Although this kind of thing had never happened before, no matter how lively the 88th hall was in the past, there was a limit. No one could predict how lively it would be this time. There might really be a situation where people couldn't enter because of overcrowding. For a time, the already bustling hall number 88 became even more lively. It was like this inside the Constellation Hall. Outside the Constellation Hall, all the major forces were trying to find out about Fa Wuzuan's background. There were too many uncertain factors in the auction of the disk array. No Chamber of Commerce could guarantee that they would be able to get it. However, if they could find out about Fa Wuzuan's background, then all the problems would be solved. There was only one clue that could be confirmed. Fa Wuzuan was not his real name. This was because the cultivators of the major galaxies had never heard of this name before the Constellation Hall opened. With this kind of cultivation, this kind of strength, no matter where he came from, he must have made a name for himself. However, before the Constellation Hall opened, no one knew of Fa Wuzuan. From this, it could be inferred that he didn't come from a top realm or a powerful galaxy. This was because if he came from a good background and had a powerful backer, he wouldn't hide his identity. These people could leave their names on the rankings. Not only could they make a name for themselves, but they could also bring glory to the realms and galaxies behind them. Why hide? Most of the people who hid their identities in the Constellation Hall had ordinary backgrounds and didn't have powerful backers. Trying to find out the background of a cultivator through an alias was no doubt very difficult. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, the situation forced the major forces to bite the bullet and continue. No one would have thought that a small mid-stage Constellation Hall cultivator would have the power to stir up the entire Wanxiang galaxy. Even the storm caused by the Azure Demon King Ma Bin in the Wanxiang Sea was quickly quelled. Such a ridiculous thing had never happened in the Wanxiang galaxy before. There were so many constellations that came and went every day. There were new ones, those who died in battle, and those who passed by. It was hard to calculate. What could a Constellation Hall cultivator do in such a big environment? However, there really was a Constellation Hall cultivator that entered the sights of the major forces because of a chaotic battle. Countless experts were worried about it. Chapter 1432. Outside the Constellation Hall, there was a treasure that looked like a palace. This kind of treasure did not have strong offensive or defensive capabilities. It was only used as a temporary residence for powerful cultivators. The cost of refining it was very high, so those without power and capital would not be able to own it. The Greenlee Palace was quite famous in the Wanxiang Galaxy because it was the residence of Jiao Yan, a sunshine cultivator from the Che Ling realm. Since the Greenlee Palace was here, it meant that Jiao Yan was here too. As a sunshine cultivator, Jiao Yan's strength was obvious to all. In the entire Wanxiang Galaxy, she was one of the top 3 cultivators. However, she had a bad habit that people did not know how to deal with. It was a habit that she had developed in the past 20 years. She loved her only son too much. The young master of the Che Ling realm had run away from home more than once because he was too strict with his mother. Not long ago, there was a rumor that the young master was tied up and brought back. He received a huge reward which made people envious. The young master was supposed to be locked up for a long time, but the Constellation Hall suddenly opened. Jiao Yan had no choice but to let him out to see the world. However, she followed him. As a sunshine cultivator, she could not enter the Constellation Hall. She could only stay outside. This was also why Chu Shen could contact her at any time. Under normal circumstances, if cultivators were in different spaces, they would not be able to communicate with each other using musical notes. However, the Constellation Hall was special. Even if a cultivator was in the Constellation Hall, they could still communicate with people outside. Of course, if a cultivator was in a battleground such as the Chaos Hall, they would not be able to communicate with the outside world. They could only communicate within the battleground. Even if cultivators passed by the Greenlee Palace, they would stay far away from it. This was out of respect for the Sunshine cultivators. At the same time, cultivators had to be careful. In this place, if you accidentally violated the rules of the Sunshine sect, you might not even know how you died. A figure flew over from the direction of the Constellation Palace and landed at the gate of the palace with ease. A maid at the Spirit Sea realm who was guarding here saluted, "Young master." Chu Shen nodded slightly and walked inside. He called out, "Mother?" "Come in." Jiao Yan's voice rang out. Judging from her voice alone, it was impossible to tell that she was a Sunshine Realm cultivator. Her voice sounded very young and tender. She was born with this voice. Although she could disguise herself slightly with her Sunshine cultivation, she had never done so before. If anyone looked down on her because of her tender voice, they would have to pay a heavy price. Chu Xinxing only saw Zhu Yan when he entered the inner hall. From her appearance, Jiao Yan did not look like a Sunshine expert. Although she was wearing a beautiful palace dress and had an extraordinary temperament, her petite figure made her look like a girl next door. Chu Shen walked up to Jiao Yan and chuckled, "Mother, look at the treasures I brought for you." Jiao Yan couldn't help but knock on his head. "You're a star constellation. Don't be so indecent all the time." "Got it." Chu Shen pursed his lips. He was annoyed that his mother was lecturing him. He took out the array disc as if he was presenting a treasure. He even made some noises with a proud look on his face. "Is this the twin chi and branch formation disc?" Jiao Yan's eyes lit up. He took the formation disc and examined it carefully. "That's right." Chu Shen nodded solemnly. With the help of this formation disc, even unfamiliar cultivators can easily connect their chi and form a formation. Jiao Yan channeled her spiritual energy into it, and a mysterious power began to flow. She then realized that it was just as Chu Shen had said. Her own chi was easily connected to Chu Shen's chi, and she seemed to be able to borrow power from Chu Shen through the power of this disc array. Chu Shen's expression froze. He was speechless. Of course, he knew that his mother was very strong. However, he had never had a direct understanding of how strong she was until this moment. Under the connection of the formation disc's chi, he could vaguely feel the terrifying yet restrained power in Jiao Yan's body. It could be said that a casual wave of that power could consign him to eternal damnation. "He gave you such a treasure just like that?" Although Jiao Yan knew about the agreement between Chu Shen and Fa Wuzuan, she still could not believe it when Chu Shen took the formation disc back. How could there be such a generous person in this world? Could it be that he had other motives? Chu Shen smiled proudly. "Boss Fa treats me as his own brother. Although the treasure is precious, it's nothing." Jiao Yan smiled faintly. She did not know if Fa Wuzuan treated Chu Shen as his own brother, but he was indeed a man of his word. Just based on this point, it was worth befriending him. However, she still had to be careful. Chu Shen was young and had not seen much. He had been under her protection all these years and did not know how sinister people could be. In this world, there were always some people who could not judge a book by its cover. "Mother, I have the formation disc back. What you promised before." Chu Shen looked at Jiao Yan with a stutter. He was afraid that Jiao Yan would go back on her words. If that happened, he would have no other choice but to make a scene. Unexpectedly, Jiao Yan nodded and said, "I will naturally do what I promised you. From now on, you can move freely in the Wanxiang galaxy." Chu Shen was stunned for a moment. Then he was overjoyed and grateful. "Thank you, Mother. You are the best." "Stop flattering me." Jiao Yan glanced at him indifferently. Although she was reluctant, she knew that Chu Shen was already a constellation. He could not live under her protection forever. If Chu Shen's aptitude was not good enough, she could take care of him and let him live a peaceful life. However, Chu Shen's aptitude was extremely good. If she took care of him too much, it would only hinder his growth. Jiao Yan had been thinking about this problem of hers recently. She felt that it was time to make some changes. Since you have decided to go out and explore, you must remember that you are no longer the young master of the Carbell world. You also do not have a mother in the sun. You are just an ordinary constellation. Unless your life is in danger, you are not allowed to use my name. I will not embarrass you, mother. Chu Shen was very excited. However, his gaze quickly became evasive again. Jiao Yen saw his expression and knew that he was hiding something. Is there anything else? Chu Shen grinned and said, it's like this. Fa Lao has decided to hold an auction in the 88th hall 3 days later. Auction? Jiao Yen frowned. Why would a mid-stage constellation like him hold an auction? What is he auctioning? As soon as she said this, she immediately raised the formation plate in her hand. Chu Shen nodded. Jiao Yen was stunned. He has more than one of these? It seems so. Then how many does he have? I don't know. I have never asked. Jiao Yen pondered for a moment and said slowly, then it seems that he did not refine this himself? Every treasure had its origin. Unless it was born with the birth of heaven and earth, or it was a starry sky treasure that was in the process of being born. Although she could not tell how long the formation plate in her hand had been refined, it looked very new. It should have been refined not too long ago. She originally thought that this thing might have been refined by Fa Wuzuan. If he had more than one formation plate, then he might really have refined it himself. This was undoubtedly good news for her. If a mid-stage constellation cultivator like Fa Wuzuan could refine it, it meant that it was not difficult to refine it. She just needed to crack the key spirit patterns. Not to mention a colossus like the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce, there were many capable people in her Che Ling boundary. So as long as she brought the formation plate back, she should be able to crack it. Although she did not know how many formation plates Fa Wuzuan had, with his strength alone, he probably could not refine many. The more magical a treasure was, the more difficult it was to refine. This was common sense. However, Fa Wuzuan wanted to use the auction to sell this formation plate. It was obvious that he wanted to make a fortune. What do you want to do with the auction? Jiao Yen asked. Boss Fa asked me to help him. Chu Shen told her about Lu Ye's request. Jiao Yen listened and nodded slightly. It's a small matter. Take my token and find someone from the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce. You just need to recruit people. Saying so, she took out a jade token and handed it to him. Although Jiao Yen was not in charge of the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce, as the local star system's Rizhao, she was still a member of the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce. After all, with her strength, it was not a problem for her to recruit people. Chu Shen received it happily. Jiao Yen warned again, although I haven't seen this Fa Wuzuan with my own eyes, from your description, he should be a very meticulous person. Since you want to befriend him, you should learn from him. There's no harm in learning from him. However, if he has any problems, you must not learn from him. Otherwise, I will break your legs. Chu Shen solemnly accepted the order and said goodbye to his mother before turning and entering the Constellation Hall. Jiao Yen pondered for a moment and then sent out a few messages. Only then did she know what had happened in the Chaotic Battle Assembly. She also knew that Fa Wuzuan had used the Chaotic Battle Assembly to make a name for the formation plate. Rizhao's way of thinking and perspective was different from ordinary people, so Jiao Yen immediately deduced that all of this was done deliberately by Fa Wuzuan. The Chaotic Battle Assembly was all for the sake of the auction. Now that everything was ready, the auction in 3 days would definitely be a bloody battle. Although there would be no smoke, it would definitely be extremely fierce. While the mother and son were talking here, Lu Yi had already arrived at the 88th hall. The auction was going to be held in 3 days, so he naturally wanted to take the opportunity to refine more formation plates. In his own plan, this was a one-time deal, not a long-term business. This was because apart from the Constellation Hall, it was difficult to provide a better and more suitable opportunity. There would not be such an opportunity in the future. Even if he refined more formation plates, he would not be able to sell them. Moreover, once the formation plates were bought, the cultivators of the major forces would definitely want to crack the mysteries inside. Even if he added seals to increase the difficulty of cracking the formation plates, he would not be able to prevent it. At most, he would only be able to buy some time. In other words, in the future, many people would be able to refine the twin chi-connected formation plate. Even if the success rate was low, as long as they invested enough manpower and time, they would eventually be able to refine it. At that time, he would not have much competition. Now that he had this opportunity, he would naturally eat until he became fat. Chapter 1433. The 88th hall was originally the most crowded hall. Today, he found that there were even more cultivators coming and going. What surprised Lu Yi was that many stalls were actually offering discounts. The cultivators who came and went often only needed to spend 80% of the usual price to buy the things they liked. Logically speaking, it was impossible for such a thing to happen. Because regardless of whether it was spirit pills, miraculous medicines, talismans, treasures, or the like, all of the items sold in Hall 88 were 10% to 20% more expensive than those sold in the Myriad Ocean. Because the merchants required time and manpower to send these goods to Constellation Hall. So if a cultivator wanted to buy something here and didn't want to waste time returning to the Myriad Ocean, then they could only spend even more money. But now, the price of many things was only 80% of the normal price. Naturally, it attracted countless cultivators to come and choose. After thinking for a while, Lu Yi understood the situation. He spread the news that the auction would be held in 3 days. The major forces were obviously urgently collecting spirit jades through this method, for fear that they would not be able to participate in the auction if they did not have enough spirit jades. This was undoubtedly a good thing for him. Soon, he bought enough materials that he needed. These materials were also discounted, and the discount was as high as 60%, which inadvertently saved him some spirit jades. The 88th hall was too noisy, so Lu Yi chose a hall outside the 4000th hall. Sure enough, it was very quiet. There were only a few hundred people in the entire hall. He found a corner, set up a formation to hide himself, condensed his clone, and began to devote himself to refining the disc. Now, every disc array he refined was a spiritual jade. 3 days passed in a flash, and Lu Yi had refined the disc for 3 days. Both his main body and clone went to work, and the inventory in his hand suddenly increased by thousands. After checking the total number of disc arrays he had stored, Lu Yi felt that it was enough. Although he could have pushed back the time of the auction to make it easier for him to refine more disc arrays, since it was an auction, he naturally couldn't make too many disc arrays. If he really wanted to satisfy all the forces, he wouldn't let them compete with each other. If that was the case, the value of the disc arrays would be reduced. Now, the amount was just right. If it couldn't satisfy all the factions, they would be able to fight for it and maximize their own benefits. Chu Shen had sent a message over, "Big brother, come quickly, everything here is ready, we are just waiting for you." Lu Yi looked at the message sent by Chu Shen and felt a little puzzled. Set up? Set up what? Lu Yi had discussed with Chu Shen before, and he only asked him to help him with one thing, which was to represent the car bell industry in the auction and help him raise the price. Although Lu Yi was not worried that the disc array would not sell, the price had to reach his expectations. He didn't ask him to set up anything. This was a small matter, so Chu Shen naturally agreed at that time. Curious, Lu Yi prepared to enter Grand Hall 88. However, a moment later, he frowned because he discovered that he couldn't enter. There was only one possibility for such a situation to occur. The 88th hall was packed with people. He sent a message to Chu Shen, and Chu Shen immediately replied, "Big brother, keep trying. I'll think of something." If the host of the auction couldn't enter the venue, what was the point of holding the auction? Wouldn't it be a joke if it couldn't be spread? However, it was simple to solve the problem. He only needed to let some of the cultivators leave to make room. Those who wanted to participate in this auction were all chambers of commerce with the major galaxies as their foundation. Each of them represented a top realm or an entire galaxy. The power they had together could not be underestimated. Whether it was coercion or temptation, it was not difficult to disperse some of the cultivators. Chu Shen relayed Lu Ye's situation, and the managers of the various chambers of commerce immediately took action. Not long after, Lu Yi, who was constantly trying, saw a blur in his vision and entered Grand Hall 88. his ears were full of noise, and there were people squeezing around him. This was really overcrowded, and there was almost no place to stand. Lu Yi didn't expect such a grand occasion. He still underestimated the curiosity of people. Even Constellation Realm cultivators liked to watch a show, especially such a rare show. Obviously, most of the cultivators gathered here were here to watch the show. Only a small portion of them were here to participate in the auction. If it was a formal auction, the host of the auction would naturally use some methods to restrict the entry of outsiders. However, this was a hall of the Constellation Palace and anyone could enter. Flying was not allowed in the hall, and even flying was not allowed. The cultivators could only stand obediently on the ground. Lu Yi looked around and immediately determined the direction he should go. Because everyone's eyes were looking at the same place, that was definitely the place he needed to go. He stepped forward and squeezed his way forward, causing many people to glare at him angrily. However, after seeing his face, some people still cupped their hands and greeted, "Fellow Taoist F." Everyone knew that he was the host of this auction. If others were to squeeze their way forward, it would be insensible. However, since it was Fa Wuzuan, it was understandable. He was going to host the auction, and if they didn't let him go, there would be no show to watch. As Lu Yi walked forward, people constantly greeted him. After the battle at the Chaotic Battle Club, Fa Wuzuan had become famous. Many people wanted to use this opportunity to get familiar with him. As he walked, Lu Yi suddenly turned his head and looked to the side. He saw the face of a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man smiled at him and walked past him. At that moment, the middle-aged man seemed to have carelessly touched his body. In such a crowded place, and Lu Yi was squeezing his way forward, it was normal for their bodies to touch. However, what was abnormal was that Lu Yi felt a reaction from his talent tree. Therefore, he was sure that the middle-aged man had done something to his body. It was very likely that it was a secret technique or treasure that could track one's whereabouts. The middle-aged man wanted to use this to determine his exact location. He was in the Constellation Palace, and those who wanted to harm him couldn't do anything to him. However, the Constellation Palace was going to be closed eventually. Now that he had planted some unknown method, it would be easier to track him down. Lu Yi didn't know what the middle-aged man had done. What he was curious about was how he had used this method. No one was allowed to attack others in the Constellation Palace. This was the rule of the Constellation Palace. Or rather, the middle-aged man's method wasn't really against him, so it didn't violate the rules of the Constellation Palace. Along the way, his talent tree showed several abnormalities, all of which occurred when he came into physical contact with others. Lu Yi silently memorized the faces of those suspicious fellows. After much difficulty, he finally arrived at the front of the crowd. As he looked up, a strange expression appeared on his face. He didn't know when, but a large round stage had appeared here. The round stage was covered with a large red carpet, and the surroundings were decorated in a luxurious manner. There was also a group of people standing some distance away, surrounding the round stage in a protective manner. Chu Shun stood on the round stage and looked around. When he saw Lu Ye's figure, he enthusiastically called out, "Big brother, over here." Lu Yi jumped onto the round stage. Chu Shun greeted him with a face full of smiles. "Big brother, these are all arranged by this little brother. Are you satisfied?" Lu Yi turned his head and looked around. He saw many cultivators sitting around the round stage. Each of them had a chair, surrounding the round stage like stars surrounding the moon. Behind these cultivators were the cultivators who were watching the show, but they were all standing. These fellow cultivators are all going to participate in the auction. I have checked their qualifications in advance. Big brother, don't worry. These people were all transferred from the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce. They will temporarily listen to my orders. The conditions are simple, so this is all I can do. Lu Yi originally thought that holding an auction wouldn't be too troublesome. As long as he gathered the people participating in the auction, he would take out the array disc, and everyone would drive up the price. But now, it seemed that he had thought things through too simply. The most important thing was that he didn't consider the problem of too many people gathering after the news spread. Now, with Chu Shun's arrangement, all these problems were solved. Those who participated in the auction were arranged in the front, making it easier for them to bid. Those who were watching the show stayed behind. In any case, they wouldn't get in the way. "You're very considerate." Lu Yi nodded. Chu Shen smiled and said, "You can rest assured that this little brother will take care of things." He tentatively asked, "Then, big brother, shall we begin? If big brother trusts me, why don't you let me host this auction?" He seemed to like this kind of lively scene. Lu Yi nodded, "No problem." He wasn't used to this kind of occasion. Now that Chu Shen took the initiative to volunteer, it was for the best. As he spoke, he took out a storage ring that he had prepared and handed it to Chu Shen. He gave a few instructions and Chu Shen nodded repeatedly. After a while, under everyone's gaze, Chu Shen lightly coughed, raised his hand slightly, and pressed down in the air, "Please be quiet." Needless to say, the cultivators really gave him face. As soon as his voice sounded, the noisy hall immediately quieted down. Chu Shen spoke again, "Today, many of you have gathered here. I believe I don't need to explain the reason for this. Today's auction will be hosted by me, Chu Shen. I hope that everyone will come and support me." Without saying much, he directly raised the storage ring in his hand, which immediately attracted everyone's attention. In this storage ring, there are 100 twin chi-linked formation discs. No reserve price. Fellow cultivators who need them, please bid. The quiet hall was instantly in an uproar, especially the cultivators who were sitting around the round table to participate in the auction. Their faces were all filled with shock. They all knew that Fa Wuzuan had more formation discs, but no one knew how many he had. They thought that Fa Wuzuan would at most have a few pieces. After all, these things had miraculous effects and were definitely not easy to refine. Even if Fa Wuzuan could refine them himself, he definitely wouldn't be able to refine many. This was also the reason why they had been frantically collecting spiritual jades for the past 3 days. They were afraid that they wouldn't have enough spiritual jades and would miss this opportunity. Who would have thought that as soon as the auction started, there would be 100 twin chi-linked formation discs? End of chapter. Chapter 1434. The cultivators participating in the auction were not the only ones who were shocked. Even Chu Shen was stunned when he heard Lu Yi say that there were 100 array discs in his storage ring. He had personally experienced the wonders of array discs. If there were 100 of them, how much power could they bring to a force? 100 array discs represented 100 formations. If 5 late-stage constellation masters joined forces, it would be a piece of cake for them to fight against an ordinary Yu Yao. In other words, each array disc meant that a force could have one more Yu Yao as their battle prowess. Of course, no matter which force it was impossible to have too many late-stage constellation masters. There was a limit to the power that array discs could bring. However, this kind of power was extremely convenient and fast. It was not an exaggeration to say that no matter which force obtained these 100 array discs, their overall strength would increase by at least 30%. How terrifying was this kind of power? If there were 100 array discs, wouldn't there be 200 or 300? The representatives of the various forces participating in the auction originally thought that Fa Wuzuan would take out 3 to 5 array discs at most. If that was the case, they would definitely fight to the death. It would not be an exaggeration to say that each array disc was worth millions. However, the number of array disrupted everyone's train of thought. This caused no one to bid in the large auction venue. After a moment of silence, an old man finally spoke. "Fellow Taoist Fa Wuzuan, may I ask, how many array discs are there?" If they knew the total number of array discs, it would be easier for them to bid. If the number was small, the bidding would be fiercer. If the number was large, the bidding would be gentler. This would ensure that everyone would get benefits and not hurt each other's reputation. On the round platform, Lu Ye's eyes were slightly lowered. He did not say a word, as if he did not hear anything. He naturally knew what the old man was thinking. However, as one of the auction parties, how could he reveal his own details? Chu Shen smiled slightly. "I can't tell you the total number of array discs. However, I can give you a very accurate piece of information. The number of array discs is definitely not enough for all the forces here. Also, The starting price of the next batch of array discs will be the second highest price after the previous batch of array discs. Therefore, fellow Taoists who want array discs must hurry up. These things will become more expensive the more they are sold. The rules of the auction were set by Lu Yi. He had also informed Chu Shen of them through voice transmission. The reason he set such a rule was not because he was afraid that these forces would collude with each other. There were at least 800 forces participating in the auction, if not 1,000. It was just that this rule was more advantageous in raising the price of the array discs. Moreover, the person who made the first move would indeed have an advantage, and it would also be easier to arouse the competition among the participating cultivators. Too many array discs. Don't go back and spend a lot of money to buy the disc array, only to find out that it was different from what you saw. That would be a huge loss of face. Chu Shen immediately said, "Of course it's not inconvenient. In the future, if there are any fellow Taoists who have doubts about array discs, you can ask to check them." With that, he released his spirit force and hundreds of almost identical array discs appeared before him. Chu Shen didn't give the array discs to others to check. If they took them and ran, he wouldn't be able to chase them back. It was undoubtedly better to have the initiative in his own hands. He looked at the old man. "Old sir, you can choose any array disc. I'll activate its power and let everyone feel it." The old man casually chose one. Chu Shen picked up the array disc, jumped off the high platform, and entered the crowd. He slightly activated the array disc's power. In an instant, many cultivators within the range of the array disc noticed the mystery of this object. Previously, they had only observed the battle between Fa Wuzuan and others to see the mystery of the array disc. Now that they personally felt it, it was undoubtedly more vivid. They were even more certain that this array disc was a rare treasure. Chu Shen returned to the round platform, raised the ring on his hand, and said, 100 array discs, no reserve price. Fellow Taoists who want one can bid now. As soon as he finished speaking, a cultivator shouted, 200,000. 200,000 for 100. One array disc was only 2,000 spirit jades. This was a far cry from the price they had originally expected in their hearts. Chu Shen immediately turned his head to look in the direction of the voice and smiled. This handsome fellow Taoist bids 200,000. 220,000. 250,000. 280,000. Several voices rang out from different corners. In just a few breaths of time, the price broke 400,000. After a while, it reached 500,000. Lu Ye's drooping eyes opened slightly. He realized that the benefits this array disc could bring him might be greater than he had imagined. He had originally estimated that it would be good if each formation plate could bring him 5,000 spirit jades. Now, this was only the first batch and he had already reached his goal. In the future, it would only get higher and higher. Of course, even if it was higher, it would not be by much. Cultivators all had a scale in their hearts. They might not be able to truly string everything together, but they were all experienced businessmen. Whatever the value of something, they would have a standard in their hearts. Thus, they would not mindlessly bid. The one who shouted 500,000 was none other than a manager of the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce. He hadn't spoken before, but after he spoke, the other voices quieted down. Obviously, he intended to give face to the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce. After all, no matter which galaxy the Chamber of Commerce was from, they all made a living in the Vientiane Sea. There was no benefit in offending the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce. Is there anyone higher than 500,000? Chu Shen asked with a smile. He asked twice, but still no one responded. Since there's no one else, I'll bid 600,000. He obviously hadn't forgotten that he had promised Lu Yi to help him raise the price. The group of cultivators participating in the auction was dumbfounded. They had never heard of the auctioneer participating in the auction. It was as if someone was both a contestant and a referee in an arena battle. Chu Shen said matter-of-factly, "I'm here on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. Is there a problem?" The manager of the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce also had a headache. He never expected that he would be stabbed in the back by one of his own people just as he was about to win. However, he had also heard of Chu Shen. He knew that Chu Shen had been spoiled by Jian. It was understandable for him to be willful at this time. Moreover, for a colossus like the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce, there was almost no difference between 500,000 and 600,000. As long as he could get the 100 array discs, his mission would be completed. He saw that Chu Shen was helping to raise the price, so he said, 600,001. Chu Shen immediately looked at him with a grin. He didn't wait any longer and said decisively, sold. Congratulations to fellow Taoist from the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce for winning the first batch of 100 array discs. Such divine objects only cost 6,000 spirit jades on average. Fellow Taoist, you've made a big profit. The manager of the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce stepped forward and took the storage ring from Chu Shen's hand without saying anything. He handed over the sufficient amount of spirit jades and immediately left the hall. He had to quickly send the array discs back to the Vientiane Sea and hand them over to experts to decipher and study them. The sooner this thing was deciphered, the sooner it could be mass-produced. 600,000 spirit jades was only the initial cost. As long as they could decipher the array discs, the profits it would bring to the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce in the future would be thousands of times greater. In the main hall, the cultivators who participated in the auction also calculated in their hearts according to Chu Shen's words. An array disc was only a few thousand spirit jades on average, which was really cheap. It should be known that almost everyone had at least collected hundreds of thousands of spirit jades, and there were many who had collected millions of spirit jades. Originally, they only planned to buy one array disc, but now they could buy 100 of them. At this time, Chu Shen had already taken the second storage ring from Lu Yi and handed the spirit jades to Lu Yi. He returned to his previous position and raised the storage ring, saying, "The second batch of 100 array discs starts at 600,000 spirit jades." As soon as he finished speaking, someone followed suit. In a very short time, the price climbed to 700,000 and was approaching 800,000 spirit jades. At this moment, Lu Yi was holding the storage ring full of spirit jades in his hand. He looked a little absent-minded. When he first came to the Vientiane Sea, he worked hard for half a year on the fishing island and only earned 300,000 spirit jades. Now, he had 600,000 spirit jades, and this was only the beginning. Lu Yi finally understood what it meant to get rich overnight. Sure enough, no one could get rich without a windfall. Suddenly, he raised his head and glanced at the cultivator who made the bid. He said, "There's no need to auction the insect tribe. I'm not selling you the array discs." The bidding stopped abruptly. The insect tribe cultivator was stunned and then flew into a rage. "Why don't you sell them to me? It's not like I can't afford the spirit jades." Lu Yi did not speak and only stared at him coldly. Although he wanted to use the array discs to make a fortune, he did not care who won them. However, the insect tribe was absolutely out of the question. He did not have a good impression of this race. The insect tribe cultivator was even more furious. "I'll bid 1,200,000 spirit jades." He suddenly raised the price of the spirit jades by a few 100,000, and this was probably the highest price he could afford. The main reason was that he did not have enough time. Lu Yi had only given him 3 days. Otherwise, he would have been able to collect even more spirit jades. As soon as he said this, many cultivators became nervous, afraid that Lu Yi would agree. If he did, there would be one less array disc to bid for. Fortunately, Lu Yi was unmoved. "If I say I'm not selling, then I'm not selling. There's still the blood tribe." He turned to look in another direction. "You don't have to bid anymore." He then looked in a third direction. "And you?" The cultivators in this direction were not blood tribe or insect tribe cultivators, but proper human cultivators. However, this guy had secretly planted some kind of trick on Lu Yi, and it was neutralized by the talent tree. Fortunately, he had the talent tree. Otherwise, Lu Yi would not even know how his whereabouts were exposed in the future. When that time came, he would definitely be in a bad situation. End of chapter. Chapter 1435. If someone wanted to harm him, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't be polite. If it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't fight in the Constellation Palace, he would have drawn his sword. The human cultivator wanted to be stubborn, but under Lu Ye's cold gaze, he admitted that he was in the wrong. He had done some things in secret without being discovered, but now that he had been discovered, it was no wonder that Fa Wuzuan didn't sell him the formation disc. Yu Rant's expression darkened. He snorted coldly and disappeared. Many people looked thoughtful. Although they didn't know why Lu Yi would target a human cultivator after targeting the insectoids and vampires, they could roughly guess that the human cultivator had done something in secret that Fa Wuzuan had noticed. After the human cultivator left, the insectoids and vampires also left. However, they all left behind some harsh words, warning Fa Wuzuan to be careful in the future. Lu Yi treated their words as farts. At the auction, cheers came out, especially those who were watching the show. They cheered the loudest. Originally, they didn't have any special impression of Fa Wuzuan. They only knew that he was powerful. Now that he had earned a lot of money with a special formation disc, they couldn't help but be envious. However, after Lu Yi drove away the vampires and insectoids, many people had a good impression of Fa Wuzuan. It was really because the insectoids and vampires had bad reputations in the universe. They had conflicts with many other races, but these two races were birds of a feather and colluded with each other. Their overall strength was impressive, so no one could do anything to them. In this situation, Fa Wuzuan didn't compromise with these two races because of temporary benefits, which naturally caused some people to resonate with him. The auction continued. The final price of the second formation disc was set at 800,000 spirit jades, which was 200,000 spirit jades more than the first. This was normal. For the first formation disc, everyone gave face to the myriad elephant Chamber of Commerce and didn't raise the price. However, for the second formation disc, it didn't matter who they gave face to. Of course, no one would keep increasing the price, because everyone knew that there would be more array discs later. The only thing that made them uncomfortable was that they didn't know how many array discs there were. Chu Xin had already started the auction for the third set. It was still 100 array discs, and the bidding was clearly less intense than before. After all, the price of 800,000 was already enough to make most of the managers of the Chamber of Commerce feel powerless. The managers of the Chamber of Commerce who had the ability to bid all adhered to a principle, and that was to try their best not to raise the price too high, lest the subsequent bids become even higher. Therefore, starting from the third disc array, the price was usually only increased 2 or 3 times before the dust settled. At this time, it all depended on who could bid faster. With the same price, whoever was faster would have the highest chance of winning. 10 portions, 20 portions, 30 portions, 50 portions, array discs seemed to come out endlessly from Lu Ye's side. The smile on Chu Xin's face had already turned stiff, but no matter how many array discs were taken out, there would never be an awkward silence. Because there were too many forces participating in the auction this time, if it were an individual, they would have to think twice before taking out hundreds of thousands of spirit jades. However, for a Chamber of Commerce that had the backing of an entire galaxy, hundreds of thousands of spirit jades wasn't a small amount, but it was nothing. However, as the number of array discs increased, the managers of the Chamber of Commerce became less competitive. Therefore, overall, the price of the array discs didn't increase much. There were even a few times when the price of the array discs was slightly lower than the previous one. Chu Xin had been doing his job seriously. Other than shouting out bids, he generally didn't say much, allowing the managers of the Chamber of Commerce to compete among themselves. However, at this moment, he revealed a smile and said slowly, "Well, I'll let everyone know that only 100 array discs have been prepared for this auction. Now, this is the 91st set, so if you still want array discs, you'll have to work harder." As soon as he said this, many managers of the Chamber of Commerce who hadn't won yet immediately became serious. Previously, the array discs had been taken out continuously from Fa Wuzuan's side, which easily gave people the illusion that there was everything here. Only now did they suddenly remember what Chu Xin said at the beginning. The total number of array discs this time was definitely not enough to be divided among the forces present. There were only 10 sets left. For a moment, Many people were annoyed that they didn't insist on bidding a higher price. Previously, there were several auctions where the other party had only bid the starting price. Now that Chu Xin had revealed the remaining amount, it was obvious that he was creating pressure for them to start bidding. Although they knew the situation, they had to do this. Chu Xin wasn't a good person, and Fa Wuzuan wasn't a good person either. This was undoubtedly a grasp of human nature. As expected, the auction of the 91st array disc was much more fierce than before. The 91st array disc was sold for about 1 million spirit jades. According to the previous pattern, even if the price of this array disc was higher, it wouldn't be much higher. It might only be a few thousand spirit jades higher. However, this time, it quickly climbed to 1.3 million spirit jades. Chu Xin was grinning from ear to ear. Although these spirit jades would not enter his pocket, in the future, he had presided over an extremely successful auction that could even be recorded in the annals of history. This kind of feeling of participation was extremely hard to come by. Suddenly, he looked at a cultivator who bid and said, "Fellow Taoist, please calm down. Don't bid recklessly. If I remember correctly, fellow Taoist only brought 750,000 spirit jades." Chu Xin had checked the assets of every cultivator who participated in the auction before. He had a good memory and naturally remembered how much capital each person had. The cultivator he pointed out said, "Fellow Taoist Chu, don't worry. Since I bid this price, I naturally can afford the spirit jades." Chu Xin pondered for a moment and realized what was going on. This cultivator indeed only brought 750,000 spirit jades, but he could join forces with others. After all, each array disc was worth 100 spirit jades. When the time came, they would just have to agree on the ratio and divide the spirit jades after the array discs were sold. He nodded slightly. "It's my fault. Fellow Taoist, please don't blame me. Everyone, please continue." The final price of the 91st array disc was less than 1.4 million spirit jades. The auction of the 92nd array disc began quickly. There were still people bidding one after another. The 93rd array disc, until the 100th array disc. After the last array disc was handed over, Lui took the spirit jades and left decisively. Chu Xin stayed behind to say a few words and quickly disappeared. The cultivators who were watching the show dispersed. Some people silently counted the number of spirit jades Fa Wuzuan had obtained this time and were fascinated for a moment. This was what it meant to amass wealth. Even the myriad elephant commerce definitely didn't have the ability to amass such a large amount of wealth in such a short time. With such a large amount of spirit jades in hand, Fa Wuzuan wouldn't have to worry about his future cultivation. He wouldn't be able to spend it all even if he had more than 10 lifetimes. It was really enviable. Lu Yi sat in a corner in one of the halls beginning with the number 4000, quietly waiting for someone to arrive. Not long after, Chu Xin walked over. The reason why he came here was naturally because Lu Yi had sent him a message. Looking at Lu Ye's current appearance, he couldn't help but laugh because Espingx Alpha was actually wearing a hooded windbreaker. The hood covered his head and was slightly lowered. If one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't be able to see his appearance clearly. Chu Xin naturally knew why Espingx Alpha was like this. It was true that people were afraid of fame and pigs were afraid of being fat. Fa Wuzuan first shone in the chaotic assembly and now amassed such a large amount of wealth. There was probably no cultivator in Constellation Hall who didn't know about him. This way, he could slightly hide his whereabouts and reduce some trouble. "Big brother." Chu Xin greeted warmly and sat down cross-legged in front of Lu Yi. He chuckled and said, "Little brother, how was my hosting?" Although it was his first time and it was inevitable that he was a little inexperienced, overall, he didn't make any mistakes. Moreover, he was completely in control of the auction's rhythm. He couldn't help but feel proud that he didn't do anything wrong. "Very good." Lu Yi nodded slightly and took out a storage ring and handed it over. Chu Xin looked at it and didn't take it. "Big brother, what are you doing?" "Thank you for your hard work." Lu Yi raised the ring and gestured. "It's not much. Take it. It's just a token of my appreciation." Chu Xin thought for a moment and reached out to take it with a smile. He said, Since Big Brother is giving it to me, I won't refuse. Big Brother, if you need anything in the future, feel free to call me. I'll be there immediately. Lu Yi nodded slightly. He had to admit that Chu Shen had helped him a lot this time. Moreover, Chu Shen's identity was special. If it was inconvenient for him to appear in the future, it would be good to ask him for help. Chu Shen left and went to another hall. Only then did he check the number of spirit jades in the storage ring. With one look he was secretly speechless. Phoenix Alpha's so-called token of appreciation was a full 500,000 spirit jades. Of course, this amount of spirit jades was nothing compared to Phoenix Alpha's harvest this time. However, 500,000 spirit jades was a fortune that ordinary cultivators would find difficult to amass in their lifetime. Even if he was the young master of the carbell industry and didn't lack for expenses, he had never possessed so many spirit jades before. He secretly praised Phoenix Alpha's generosity and was in a good mood. At the same time, Lu Yi, who was hidden by the array formation, was examining the pile of storage rings in front of him. He was rich. This time he was really rich. There were at least 600,000 spirit jades in each of the storage rings, and the total amount was about 110 million spirit jades. This was more than double of what he had expected to earn. Therefore, giving Chu Shen 500,000 spirit jades as a token of appreciation was nothing. Chu Shen had spent so much effort to set up the auction and even personally helped him auction the items. He didn't mention anything about remuneration. However, Lu Yi couldn't ignore it. Moreover, when the first array disc was auctioned, Chu Shen had helped raise the price by 100,000 spirit jades. Don't underestimate this mere 100,000. Because of the rules of the auction, the first array disc being raised by 100,000 meant that every subsequent array disc would be raised by 100,000. Of course, the truth might not be so exaggerated. However, Chu Shen's bid had earned Lu Yi at least 10 to 20 million spirit jades. End of chapter. Chapter 1436. After selling 100 disc arrays, he collected 100 storage rings. It was naturally inconvenient for Lu Yi to carry so many storage rings around, so he could only deal with them first. First, he put some of the spirit jades in the storage rings into the storage space on the back of his hand, but he couldn't put too many of them, and he had to leave some space for backup. After a while, Lu Yi looked at the dozen or so storage rings in front of him and felt troubled. He never thought that there would be a day when he would be worried about having too much wealth. This was really a happy worry. Cultivators generally didn't carry too many storage rings when they were outside. For example, he only had 3, and they were all worn on his left hand because it was inconvenient to use his right hand to hold a saber to kill enemies. Some cultivators carried a bit more, but not too much. Lu Yi couldn't help but have a headache about how to deal with these storage rings filled with spirit jades. He couldn't wear all of them on his hand. That would be inappropriate, and he couldn't wear all of them on his 10 fingers. After thinking for a while, he rummaged through one of his storage rings and found a thin rope. It was a spirit treasure, and Lu Yi didn't know its specific effects. In any case, it was a spoil of war that he didn't know where he got it from. With the help of this thin rope, he strung all the storage rings together and hung them around his neck. After feeling it for a while, he felt a little uncomfortable. He kept feeling that there was something on his chest, so he took it off and tied it around his waist. Only then did he feel much more comfortable. After thinking for a while, he dispersed the 1,000-faced spirit pattern that he had been maintaining and returned to his original appearance. Lu Yi planned to go to the 88th hall again. With so many spirit jades on hand, he had to spend some of them. He planned to find some fire attribute treasures for his talent tree to devour. In this way, after the Constellation Hall closed, he could return to the Wanxiang Sea to cultivate without restraint and strive to advance to the late stage of the Constellation Hall as soon as possible. Although he had long known that the Constellation Realm was the starting point to enter the starry sky, to be honest, he didn't feel much before. Until he came to the Wanxiang Galaxy. In the starry sky, there were too many Constellation Realm cultivators. For cultivators like Lu Yi who came from a remote domain and had no backing, the strength of a mere Constellation Realm cultivator was not enough. Although he could maneuver around the Constellation Palace and sweep everything before him, That was because his opponents were also constellation realm cultivators. However, traveling through the starry skies wasn't just about encountering constellations. There was also Yu Yao and Ri Zhao. If one really encountered the unreasonable Yu Yao and Ri Zhao, they might not even know how they died. He couldn't always count on the red talisman, and he only had one red talisman left. The higher one's cultivation, the greater one's thirst for power. Only by reaching the Moon Jade realm as soon as possible would one have the ability to protect themselves in this vast world. He had a unique advantage in terms of cultivation as long as he was willing to spend. Moreover, as long as he had enough fuel for his talent tree, the Wanxiang Sea was undoubtedly the best place to cultivate. Returning to the 88th hall, Lu Yi felt relaxed. Without Fa Wuzuan's face, he naturally wouldn't be targeted by others. The auction had ended, but the number of people here had not decreased by much. The cultivators coming and going were all talking about the grand occasion of the auction, all of them exclaiming that it had been an eye-opener. Lu Yi walked past one stall after another. Whenever there was a fire attribute treasure that could be devoured by the innate tree, he would purchase it. Although the prices of the goods here had returned to their original level and were slightly more expensive than the 10,000 elephant sea, Lu Yi was now filthy rich, so why would he care about such a small loss? Moreover, there were too many merchants and stalls here. It was undoubtedly much more convenient to search for fire-type treasures here than in the Wanxiang Island's scattered markets. He shopped for 3 days and visited all the stalls. He spent nearly 10 million spiritual jades and obtained a large pile of fire-type treasures. He wasn't in a hurry to refine and devour them because the talent tree's fuel reserves were still abundant and didn't need to be replenished. Lu Yi naturally didn't want to waste time on this matter. However, he soon discovered an awkward problem. Originally, he came here to buy things with the intention of spending some spiritual jades to reduce the number of storage rings he had. In the end, he spent the spiritual jades, but the number of storage rings seemed to have increased. Things didn't go as planned. Lu Yi didn't linger here any longer. He went to another large hall and looked up at the contribution ranking. Before the battle royale, his ranking on the contribution ranking was below 300. However, after the battle royale, he fought his way back to the top 10 and was now ranked 8th. It could be said that the battle royale didn't only give him a huge amount of mystic light, but also an incomparably abundant amount of contribution points. However, after 3 days of delay, his ranking had dropped to below 70. It had been 2 months since the Constellation Hall opened. According to the various information he had obtained, there was still 1 or 2 months before the Constellation Hall closed. When the last half a month's time limit arrived, the journey of ordinary cultivators in the Constellation Hall would end. At that time, they would naturally return to where they came from. Only cultivators who had left their names on the contribution ranking would have to participate in the last half a month's battles. This was the final battle to determine the ranking. During this half a month's time, the lower-ranked cultivators on the contribution ranking could challenge the higher-ranked cultivators. If they won, they wouldn't directly replace their opponent's ranking. Instead, based on their performance in the battle, the winner would obtain a certain amount of contribution points from the loser. In this way, the stronger one was, the more contribution points they could obtain. Therefore, Lu Yi didn't pay much attention to the contribution ranking because he only needed to ensure that he was on the contribution ranking. When the ranking battle began, he could continuously challenge the cultivators in front of him until his contribution points reached first place. In this regard, he still had some confidence. What he needed to be vigilant against were nothing more than some strange treasures with strange effects. However, the ranking battle had yet to begin. Since he had nothing to do, he could continue to participate in the competition in the Constellation Hall. Not to mention anything else, the profound light reward obtained after each victory was not fake. It was an extremely pure starry sky energy that any cultivator could absorb at will. Just as Lu Yi was about to participate in the ranking battle through a door, a sound suddenly vibrated. Chu Shen sent a message. "Big brother, the ghost cultivator who has been following you in the chaotic assembly is looking for you." Chu Shen was undoubtedly talking about this ghost cultivator. Towards this woman, Lu Yi didn't have any temper. Previously, during the chaotic assembly, She had robbed him of a lot of his gains, and in the end he had been deceived by her. However, he had to admit that this woman was quite capable, and her current contribution ranking was quite good. What is it? Lu Yi asked. Ghost and Fa Wuzuan had not interacted before the chaotic assembly, but she was acquainted with Li Taibai, so they could be considered to have a bit of friendship. Lu Yi didn't know why she was looking for him. She said she has a business deal to do with you. If Big Brother isn't interested, I'll reply to her. Ghost undoubtedly wanted to contact Lu Yi directly, but unfortunately, she couldn't find his whereabouts. She happened to meet Chu Shun, so she asked him to pass on a message. Lu Yi had just received more than 100 million spirit jades, and he had spent 10 million spirit jades with a wave of his hand. He was truly extravagant. How could he be in the mood to do business with Ghost? In his impression, this woman was a poor bitch. Of course, that might not be the case now. During the chaotic assembly, she had obtained a lot of spoils of war. However, after pondering for a moment, Lu Yi found that Ghost really did have something he was interested in. Location. Chu Shen reported a number. When Lu Yi arrived, he found that not only were Chu Shen and Ghost standing there, but there was also an acquaintance. Puku. Speaking of which, Lu Yi felt that he had always underestimated Puku because this person always gave him the feeling that he was a bit cynical. Apart from being interested in fishing and beautiful female cultivators, the rest was drinking. He also didn't seem to have seen him cultivate. He didn't seem to want to make progress. However, in fact, Ghost wasn't the only one who had left her name on the list. Puku's name was also on the list, and his ranking was even higher than Ghost's. Lu Yi vaguely felt that Puku was probably from a big force, so he didn't have to worry about food and clothing. This was interesting. The two guys who had left their names on the list had gathered together and came looking for him. He didn't know what they wanted to do. Big Brother. Seeing Lu Yi arrive, Chu Shen hurriedly greeted him. Lu Yi was wearing Fa Wuzuan's face at this moment. He stepped forward and stared coldly at Ghost. Then he took out an item and threw it at her. It was the trash or that Ghost had stolen before. Ghost caught it and smiled. Thank you for the reward, fellow Taoist. With a shameless look on her face, she happily put the trash or into her storage ring. To her, even if this or could only be sold for a few pieces of spirit jade, it was still a good thing. Chu Shen saw that the atmosphere was not right and quickly ran away. You guys chat, I'll take my leave first. He disappeared in an instant. What's the matter? Lu Yi asked. Ghost's eyebrows relaxed and she looked a bit serious. Something good. Lu Yi turned around and left. Ghost hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed his sleeve. Don't go. There really is something good. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked someone to call you over. Lu Yi stopped and frowned. You and I are neither relatives nor friends, and we've never interacted before. We just met a few times at the chaotic assembly. If there really is something good, why did you call me over? Ghost said, Of course it's because of fellow Taoist strength. Fellow Taoist, you slaughtered everyone in the chaotic assembly. I was very impressed. If fellow Taoist hadn't brought 4 beautiful women with him, I might have asked fellow Taoist to take them in. If you say another word of nonsense, I'll leave. Lu Yi was a bit impatient. If Puku wasn't here and there were some things that he wanted to observe from Ghost, he really didn't want to have anything to do with this woman. She was such a poor ghost, and she was also a ghost cultivator. It wouldn't be good to get involved with her. Seeing Lu Ye's serious expression, Ghost finally spoke the truth. All right, the main thing is that I want to borrow the power of fellow Taoist's formation plate. The twin chi and branch formation plate was too useful. Fa Wuzuan had led the 4 constellations to slaughter everyone in the chaotic assembly. If the 3 of them who had left their names on the ranking list joined forces, they would definitely be stronger. Ghost had some things that she needed to do with the formation plate's power. End of chapter. Chapter 1437. Right now, the twin chi-connected array disk was extremely famous. However, all the array disks that appeared in the auction were snatched away by the various major factions. They were all used to research and try to decipher them. Ghost did not have a way to get her hands on one. Hence, after much consideration, she could only start with Fa Wuzuan. However, she was not sure if she could get this god of fortune to help her. She did not know what to pay. After meeting Chu Shen by chance, she decided to make a last-ditch effort. She did not expect Fa Wuzuan to actually give her face. She immediately understood that this matter would most likely succeed. However, she did not know what conditions Fa Wuzuan would raise. Hearing that she wanted to borrow the array disk's power, Lu Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a lot of information in his words. One had to know that the 3 people present were all famous on the rankings. In terms of individual strength, they were all top-notch in the constellation realm. If they really borrowed the array disk's power, they might even be able to put up a fight against Yu Yao. What could possibly happen to Ghost that required the 3 of them to work together? Lu Yi immediately thought of a possibility. You have an exclusive scene? Pu Ku, who was drinking quietly at the side, looked at Lu Yi in surprise. He seemed to be surprised by his quick thinking. Ghost had only mentioned the twin chi-connected array disk, but Fa Wuzuan had already guessed it. Such thinking speed was really impressive. Ghost was also stunned. However, since Lu Yi pointed it out, she did not hide it. That's right. Realization dawned on Lu Yi. No wonder this woman wanted to borrow the array disk's power. If it was an exclusive scene, then it was understandable. The so-called exclusive scene was actually a type of scene in the Constellation Palace. However, it was different from other scenes. When cultivators entered the exclusive scene, they basically did not need to fight with the other constellations. This was because, under normal circumstances, other cultivators could not enter a cultivator's exclusive scene. This was also the origin of the word exclusive. In such a scene, sometimes one did not even need to make a move. One only needed to think of a way to solve the various problems. Of course, there were also times when one needed to make a move. Ghost had undoubtedly encountered a situation where she needed to make a move. Moreover, the enemy was definitely very powerful. She could not deal with it alone, so she wanted to seek help. This was also the special feature of exclusive scenes. In other scenes, as long as a cultivator exited, the battle would be over. However, exclusive scenes were different. Even if a cultivator exited, they could enter again. Of course, there was a limit to the number of times they could enter and exit. Perhaps exclusive scenes even had a time limit. After participating in the Constellation Hall contest for so long, Lu Yi had long heard of the exclusive scenarios. However, the chances of encountering such scenarios were extremely low. Usually, it was 1 in 10,000. He had never encountered one before. He never expected Spectre to encounter one. This woman's luck was really good. According to what Lu Yi knew, it was very easy to find valuable treasures in exclusive scenarios. Often, an exclusive scenario was a treasure hunt. How strong is the enemy? Lu Yi asked. Every time Yu Ling uttered the words Yu Yao, he would immediately turn around and leave. Although the 3 of them might actually be able to put up a fight against an ordinary Yu Yao if they worked together using the twin chi-connected branch formation disk, the nature of Yu Yao's power was completely different from Xing Su's. No matter how weak Yu Yao was, she was still Yu Yao. Yu Ling did have some things that piqued his interest, but that was it. He wouldn't take the risk for something so trivial. Late-stage Constellation Hall. Spectre opened her mouth and added, very, very strong. Of course, the main thing is that they restrain me a little. Otherwise, I should be able to take them down myself. Tell me in detail. Spectre's expression brightened. She began to tell him about her exclusive scenario. Puka should have known about it long ago. At this moment, he only told Lu Yi. Lu Yi listened quietly. He felt that Spectre wouldn't lie to him about this kind of thing. Because if she lied in the slightest, Lu Yi could immediately retreat when he entered and realized that something was wrong. If she wanted Lu Yi to help her, she had to tell him the truth. To Spectre, the more detailed Fa Wuzuan was, the higher the chances of success. She was originally a little worried that Fa Wuzuan wouldn't be willing to work with her. However, Fa Wuzuan's obvious interest made her feel a little nervous. During the chaotic assembly, she had snatched many of Fa Wuzuan's heads. She couldn't help but wonder if this guy wanted to take revenge on her. If that was the case, then she would be in a passive position. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was amiss. After saying that, she said, "Fellow Taoist, if you are unwilling, I can buy a twin chi connected branch formation disc from you." When the time came, she could find someone else to work with. She didn't have to rely on Fa Wuzuan. 100,000. Lu Yi looked at her indifferently. What? Spectre blinked her big eyes. She looked like she didn't hear clearly. Formation disc, 100,000 spiritual jades. No bargaining. Why don't you just rob me? Spectre was furious. She was a good person, but she didn't want to talk about money. She was sensitive when it came to money. She said angrily, "I've been to auctions. On average, a formation disc is only 10,000 spiritual jades. You want 100,000? Do you have any conscience? Can the wholesale price be the same as the retail price?" Lu Yi asked. Spectre opened her mouth. She suddenly felt that Fa Wuzuan's words made sense. She was still annoyed. "But it can't be as expensive as 100,000. I agree." Lu Yi suddenly said. "Hey, did you hear me?" Spectre roared. She was about to explode. Hey Wuzuan seemed a little abnormal. "But I have a request." Spectre felt very tired. She was sure that Fa Wuzuan was here to take revenge on her. But she had planned to work with Fa Wuzuan from the beginning. Now that he had agreed, why couldn't she be happy? She said angrily, "What request?" She felt a little more at ease. If Fa Wuzuan had agreed without asking anything, it would be too abnormal. Now that he had a request, it was normal. Lu Yi stared straight into her eyes and said calmly, "I want to take a look at the ghostly patterns on your body. The part about concealment." In Lu Yi's plan, he had to deduce all the spiritual patterns he had. He was busy with the Constellation Palace competition and didn't have the time. He could do this when he cultivated in the future. The next thing he needed to deduce was concealment. Now that he wasn't strong enough, he could make up for it with concealment. If he encountered a strong enemy he couldn't beat, he could hide. In this aspect, Spectre was undoubtedly the best. In the chaotic assembly, Lu Yi had searched for her many times but to no avail. This guy was really like a ghost, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. If he could take a look at the ghostly patterns on her body, it would be of great help to his own deduction. As soon as he said this, Pu Ku, who was drinking silently, tilted his head and spat out all the wine in his mouth. He then turned his head and stared at Lu Yi in shock. Spectre's eyes also curved. She looked like she was smiling, but in fact, her eyes were overflowing with cold light and contained infinite murderous intent. Lu Yi looked at her calmly. The murderous intent in Spectre's eyes grew thicker and thicker, as if she wanted to kill Lu Yi here. If this wasn't the Constellation Palace, she might have really attacked. But this was the Constellation Palace. Even if she wanted to, she couldn't. As their eyes met, the atmosphere was quiet and dignified. Pu Ku moved slightly to the side. After a long while, Ghost exhaled and said slowly, "Fellow Taoist, do you know what this condition of yours means?" "I know." Lu Yi nodded. He wasn't completely ignorant of the ghost race. How could he not know that his request was a bit unreasonable? However, if Spectre wanted to borrow the power of him and the array plate, she naturally had to pay a price. That's good, Spectre smiled and looked up and down, scrutinizing Lu Yi from head to toe as if she wanted to get to know him again. She nodded slightly and looked at Pu Ku. "Let's go." If Fa Wuzuan had asked for other conditions, it would have been fine, but how could she agree to something like looking at the ghostly patterns on her body? This was simply a provocation to her, a humiliation. She secretly swore to teach Fa Wuzuan a lesson after leaving the Constellation Palace. She would let him know the tragic consequences of offending a top ghost cultivator. 30,000. Lu Yi lowered his head and rubbed the storage ring on his hand. Ghost, who had turned halfway, suddenly paused. Her ears twitched slightly as she looked at Lu Yi coldly. "What? I'll pay you 30,000 spirit jades." Lu Yi looked up at her. Spectre was furious. "What do you take me for? Spectre, may be poor, but I have a backbone. How can a mere 30,000 spirit jades move me? 50,000. Lu Yi raised the price without changing his expression. Peh. Spectre snorted, and her surging murderous aura diminished by more than half. 80,000. Spectre's murderous aura was like a bucket of cold water poured on a bonfire. It was so faint that it was almost undetectable. She frowned. 100,000. Lu Yi was still rubbing the storage ring on his finger. Spectre's expression became complicated, and the look in her eyes changed. She was in a dilemma. She knew that she could not agree to Fa Wuzuan's rude and unruly conditions. If she did, she could forget about raising her head in front of Fa Wuzuan in the future. So no matter what, she absolutely could not. She could not agree. But he was offering so much. Suddenly, she remembered that Fa Wuzuan had a net worth of hundreds of millions of spirit jades. A mere 100,000 was nothing to him. Her expression became stubborn. So what if you have money? If you have the ability, pay me 200,000 and I'll call you father. Lu Yi looked at her indifferently and said softly, 300,000. Father. Spectre blurted out. How humiliating. How shameful. However, she never thought that there would be a day when she would be hit by someone with spirit jades. This feeling was really complicated. Gulp, 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 gulp. Spectre's murderous aura had long disappeared. She looked at Lu Yi with a smile. When Z has a lot of gold, I'm willing to become a bosom friend. In the future, if you need anything, just call me. Spectre will not hesitate. Lu Yi nodded and handed her 100,000 spirit jades. This is the down payment. I'll give you the rest after this. No problem. Spectre agreed readily. She kept the 100,000 spirit jades as if she had received a treasure. She was in a good mood. End of chapter. Chapter 1438. Ghost suddenly realized that things had become a little strange. She had come to ask Fa Wuzuan for help, and she was already mentally prepared for him to reject her or make some unreasonable request. But now, Fa Wuzuan had indeed made a rude request, but he still had to pay her 300,000 spirit jades. This matter was quite unpredictable. She gritted her teeth. It wasn't like she would lose a piece of meat. What was the big deal? Although the ghost tattoo was secretive, it wasn't a secret. Many races had studied the ghost tattoo. If Fa Wuzuan had a way, he could have used other channels to study the ghost tattoo. After sorting out her thoughts, Ghost looked at Lu Yi. If there's anything you need to prepare, go ahead. We can wait for you here. Lu Yi shook his head. He had nothing to prepare. Then let's begin. Ghost took out an item as she spoke. Lu Yi looked at it and saw that it looked like a leg bone, but it was as white as jade. He couldn't tell if it was made of bone or jade. This thing should be a passageway to the exclusive scene. Exclusive scenes couldn't be entered directly. You had to obtain a passageway from another scene and use that passageway's power to enter. For example, in the Battle Royale, if a passageway to an exclusive scene appeared on the battlefield and was obtained by a cultivator, he could use that passageway to enter the corresponding exclusive scene. Another example was the battlefield where Lu Yi first met Chu Shen. There might have been a passageway to an exclusive scene, but no one searched carefully. Even if there really was one, it was missed. The ghost held the pure white jade bone and poured her spiritual energy into it. In an instant, a layer of pure white halo spread out and turned into a door. You two go first, Ghost said. Puka didn't say a word and rushed in first, followed by Lu Yi. After the two of them entered the door, Ghost stepped into the door. When she disappeared, the door disappeared as well. In the narrow passage, Lu Yi saw Puka not far away when he appeared. He had a 3-meter-long fishing rod in his hand and was in a vigilant position. Lu Yi couldn't help but glance at the fishing rod. The corners of his eyes twitched. It was his first time seeing such a spirit treasure. But then again, although he had known Puku for quite some time, he had never fought side by side with him. They turned to look at their surroundings. It was similar to what Ghost had said. This should be an ancient tomb. It was not damp inside, and the tomb passage was like a maze, leading in all directions. The place where the three of them appeared was a rather spacious tomb passage. The light wasn't dim, because as far as the eye could see, there were balls of willow, the wisps floating around, emitting a faint light. A ball of willow. The wisp floated in front of Lu Yi. He reached out to touch it, but to his surprise, the wisp floated away like a frightened rabbit. Lu Yi's movements were extremely fast, and he immediately grabbed the ghost fire in his hand. It wasn't warm at all. Instead, it was cold to the touch. A layer of frost immediately spread out from the center of his palm. Lu Yi raised his eyebrows. The wisp looked inconspicuous, but its power was actually very strange. He had to be careful not to be contaminated by it, or else it would be troublesome. Spectre had already explained this before. Lu Yi was now experiencing it for himself and found that it was no different from what Spectre had said. Spectre had already entered and appeared not far away from him. Lu Yi turned to look at her. Let's begin. Naturally, he was referring to the matter of observing Spectre's ghost tattoo. Previously, there were many people coming and going in the main hall, which was extremely inconvenient. Now that there were only the three of them here, there was naturally no problem. Moreover, Lu Yi didn't trust Spectre very much. He had already paid a deposit of 100,000 yuan, so he had to settle the matter of the ghost tattoo before this was over. Otherwise, Spectre might not recognize him after they left this place. Why are you in such a hurry? Spectre snapped. Either we start now or I quit right now. Lu Yi insisted. How troublesome. Spectre pursed her lips and looked up at Pu Ku. Pu Ku was very self-aware. I'll go ahead and scout the way. As he spoke, he walked forward, turned a corner, and disappeared. With only the two of them left, Spectre's expression became awkward, as if ants were crawling all over her body. She looked at Lu Yi and said, let's make this clear first. Remember to pay after you're done. Cut the crap. Also, I'll only give you 5 breaths, no more. 20 breaths. Lu Yi stared at her. 10 breaths, no more than that. After a round of verbal sparring, they finally settled on 15 breaths. Spectre slowly turned around and threw the back of Lu Yi's head. She took a few steps forward, stood still, cocked her head, and warned Lu Yi, stand there and don't move. Lu Yi replied. Spectre turned her head back and took a deep breath, as if she was making an extremely difficult decision. Lu Yi waited quietly. At this point, he didn't want to rush her. No matter how shameless she was still a woman. After a long while, Spectre seemed to have made up her mind, and her hands suddenly moved. In the next instant, a back as smooth as jade appeared in Lu Yi's vision. He was stunned. Spectre's forearms and calves were covered in ghost tattoo, so he thought that it was all over her body. He didn't expect that to be the case. However, as Spectre urged her strength, pitch-black patterns suddenly appeared on her back, crisscrossing and looking incomparably mysterious. At first glance, there were traces of concealment spiritual tattoos mixed in, but these patterns were undoubtedly many times more complicated than simple concealment spiritual tattoos. This was the ghost tattoo of the Ghost Clan, and what Spectre had shown was undoubtedly the concealment part. After all, this was what Lu Yi had asked for. Although ghost tattoo was something that the Ghost Clan was born with, each ghost tattoo was different. It had innate factors, but also traces of cultivation. In Lu Yi's view, Spectre's ability was among the top of the Ghost Clan among those of the same cultivation level. This could be seen from her ranking on the accumulated tokens list. Therefore, the concealment method she cultivated must be unique. With Spectre's activation of the concealment ghost tattoo, her entire body became incorporeal. If she hadn't deliberately let Lu Yi see those ghost tattoo, even these ghost tattoo would have disappeared. Therefore, what appeared before Lu Yi's eyes at this moment was only the pattern formed by the complicated patterns. Even if an ordinary cultivator saw such a pattern, they would be confused and dizzy, but to Lu Yi, it was a rare beauty. He immediately activated the insight spiritual tattoos to enhance his eyes and observed carefully. At the same time, he memorized the structure and arrangement of those patterns in his heart. This was an important foundation for the talent tree to deduce concealment spiritual tattoos in the future. 15 breaths of time passed in the blink of an eye. Spectre's figure reappeared while Lu Yi was still observing, but she had already put on her clothes. She turned around with a cold face. Time's up. Lu Yi closed his eyes and recalled the information he had seen about the ghost tattoo. When he opened his eyes again, Spectre stretched out a small hand in front of him, obviously asking for the rest of the payment. Lu Yi didn't beat around the bush and directly gave her 200,000 spirit jades. Spectre beamed with joy. You're a weapon cultivator. Why are you observing concealment? I'm afraid it's too late for you to become a ghost cultivator, Spectre said as she counted the number of spirit jades. For the first time in his life, he realized that it was so easy to earn money. I also want to observe the ghost tattoo on concealment. Lu Yi said. Concealment and concealment had always been used together. Only in this way could one hide themselves more perfectly. Since he had already gained something from the concealment ghost tattoo, Lu Yi naturally wanted to observe the one on concealment. No. Spectre didn't even raise her head. It's still the same price. No means no. Then name your price. This isn't a matter of price. Spectre looked up and glared at him with some annoyance. Lu Yi suddenly understood. The reason why Spectre had agreed to let him observe the concealment ghost tattoo was that it was on the back. Therefore, it didn't matter much even if he took a look. One must know that some female cultivators usually wore extremely revealing clothes, exposing a large part of their back. However, the ghost tattoo on concealment was definitely in some inconspicuous positions. If Lu Yi was also a woman, it would be fine. However, Lu Yi was a man. Spectre wouldn't agree no matter what. This really wasn't a matter of money. As she counted the spirit jades, Spectre suddenly seemed to have thought of something. She looked at Lu Yi and somehow made a flirtatious expression. Why don't you marry me? Then, you can look at me however you want. She suddenly felt that her idea was very clever. Fa Wuzuan was strong enough, and his future was bound to be bright. He wasn't bad-looking and most importantly he was rich. If she could marry Fa Wuzuan, she wouldn't have to worry about cultivation in the future. She could also completely get rid of her identity as a pauper. I'm afraid you're dreaming. Lu Yi rejected decisively. Think about it? Spectre still didn't give up. Have you forgotten what you called me before? Lu Yi glanced at her indifferently. Spectre was furious. If you dare mention that, I'll fight you to the death. Lu Yi turned and walked in the direction that Pu Ku had left. He couldn't be bothered to continue arguing with her. Although the deal was done, he still had to do what he promised. Of course, the most important thing was that Pu Ku was also here. In this vast Wanxiang galaxy, among the people he knew, there were only two who could be considered friends. One was Chu Shen, and the other was Pu Ku. However, Chu Shen was Fa Wuzuan's friend, and Pu Ku was Li Taibai's friend. The enemy's Spectre was going to deal with this time weren't weak. If he left, leaving Spectre and Pu Ku behind, they might not be able to succeed. After turning a corner, he saw Pu Ku using his fishing rod as a rod from afar, fighting with a group of strange fellows. However, rather than calling it a battle, it was more like a one-sided massacre. The enemies couldn't get close to Pu Ku at all. End of chapter. Chapter 1439. The so-called exclusive scene could actually be understood as a special kind of secret realm. However, this kind of secret realm was attached to the system of Constellation Hall and could not be entered without going through Constellation Hall. Lu Yi looked at the enemies Pu Ku was facing. At first glance, they looked like bone race, but they were somewhat different from real bone race. This was because although the bone race were called bones, they actually had flesh and blood. Many of their skeletons were exposed outside their bodies, a kind of exoskeleton wrapped around flesh and blood. The enemies Pu Ku was facing were definitely not real bone race because these guys were just skeletons without the slightest bit of flesh. Lu Yi did not know what kind of power was supporting these skeletons, and they even had considerable mobility and combat strength. She could only sigh at the vastness of the starry sky and how strange it was. The number of skeletons was not small, and they surged forward like a tide from the front of the tomb. Pu Ku stood there, the fishing rod in his hand swinging back and forth, looking like a man holding back 10,000 enemies. The overall level of these skeletons was about the level of early Constellation Realm cultivators, so this kind of strength was naturally nothing in front of Puku. However, there were too many of them, and all of them were not afraid of death, so Puku could not hold on for too long. Logically speaking, this place had already been explored by Spectre once, so there should not be so many enemies, but Spectre was a ghost cultivator after all. When she came here last time, she had stealthily moved all the way and was not detected by these skeletons at all. This time, she could not do it with Lu Yi and Puku. She could not do it like last time, so she could only kill her way through. Lu Yi flashed to Puku's side, intending to test the strength of these skeletons. She identified one of them and pulled out her sword. Although she easily killed an enemy, Lu Yi also felt that although these skeletons did not look like much, they were actually very hard. Because they had no flesh and blood at all, the defensive strength of their bones far exceeded that of ordinary early Constellation Realm cultivators, barely reaching the level of middle Constellation Realm cultivators. This was undoubtedly not the right way to kill skeletons. They had only just started and they had already encountered so many skeletons. If they really killed their way through like this, their sword would have a hole in it. Lu Yi immediately changed from slashing to stabbing. Each skeleton's two eye sockets had ghostly flames pulsing. According to Spectre, this was their weakness. As long as the ghostly flames in their eye sockets were destroyed, these skeletons would truly die. Puku was also using this method to kill skeletons. He thrust out his long saber. The saber flashed like a falling meteor. Then, the ghost fire in the eye sockets of the skeleton in front of him was extinguished. The skeleton, which looked like a living creature, immediately fell to the ground and stopped moving. This was really useful. Ghost also arrived in a flash and cooperated with the other two as they charged forward. After dealing with the skeletons, Lu Yi took out the twin chi connection array disc and activated its power. In an instant, both Puku and Spectre were shocked. Any cultivator who experienced the power of the disc formation for the first time could feel its incredible power. The two of them could feel the terrifying and condensed foundation inside Fa Wuzun's body. The spectators knew that Fa Wuzun was strong, but most of them felt that Fa Wuzun's special team was able to achieve such a good result because of the Black Tortoise array. If they didn't have that array, no matter how strong they were, they wouldn't be able to perform well in such an environment. But only after truly connecting with Lu Ye's aura did they realize that while the Black Tortoise array was important, the strength of the cultivator leading the array was the deciding factor. Spectre couldn't understand. How could a mid-constellation realm cultivator have such a powerful foundation? She came from a top realm like the northern underworld ghost region. Whether it was personal strength or experience, she was at the top of the constellation realm. But she had never seen someone like Lu Yi. She secretly rejoiced that she had found the right person to ask for Fa Wuzun's help. If it was someone else, even if they were on the same ranking, they wouldn't be able to give her such a sense of security. That's right, Spectre didn't know what was going on either. The moment their auras connected, she felt a sense of tranquility in her heart. It was as if the three of them could defeat any enemy no matter how powerful they were if they joined forces. She didn't have any objections to Fa Wuzun's decision to lead the array. Since they had formed the array, they naturally couldn't act sneakily like she did when she was alone. The array needed to charge and break through the enemy's ranks openly. She was a ghost cultivator who was used to hiding in the dark. She could sneak up on people, but she wasn't suitable to lead the array. As for Puku, he didn't look like a proper weapon cultivator. His personality also gave off the feeling of being at ease. Since Fa Wuzun wanted to lead the array, then let him be. With the three of them working together, it could be said that they were cutting melons and vegetables along the way. Those skeletons that pounced from the front couldn't stop the three of them at all. Wherever they passed, the ground was covered in white bones. After killing for almost an hour, they didn't know how many skeletons they had killed before the area in front of them suddenly became empty. After working together for less than an hour, Puku and Ghost were completely familiar with the power of the disc array. In front of them was a pitch-black hall. The door of the hall was wide open like a beast's mouth. Lu Yi took the lead. His divine sense surged and probed inside, but he didn't detect any signs of life. He turned to look at Spectre. Spectre said, "There's a big guy inside. We just need to kill it." She had come here last time, but before she could make a move, her whereabouts had been discovered. She knew that she couldn't do anything on her own, so she returned to the Constellation Hall to recruit helpers. However, the appearance of the Chaos Assembly disrupted her original plan, so she could only participate in the Chaos Assembly first. She had originally intended to invite not Lu Yi, but another late-stage star constellation cultivator who was ranked in the top 100 on the ranking. However, after witnessing Lu Ye's performance in the Chaotic Battle Club and seeing the twin chi-connected branches formation disc, she changed her mind. In fact, this was also the reason why she had been secretly following Lu Yi in the Chaos Assembly. She mainly wanted to observe more. As for snatching heads and spoils of war, it was purely because her hands itched. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. "Let's recover," Puku said. No matter what was inside, if it could force Spectre to retreat, it definitely wasn't something to be trifled with. If the three of them wanted to enter, they naturally had to be in peak condition. They weren't worried that the big guy inside would come out. To be honest, if the big guy really did come out, it would be a good thing for them. After all, rashly barging into such a strange hall was actually a kind of risk. The three of them maintained their formation and refined their spirit jades to recover. After a while, when Puku and Spectre had fully recovered, Lu Yi called out, "Let's go." He took the lead and walked into the hall. Their field of vision suddenly became pitch black, but with their divine senses, they could sense that this hall was very large and spacious. However, they still couldn't find any trace of the big guy that Spectre had mentioned. There seemed to be a lot of broken bones on the ground. As they stepped on them, cracking sounds could be heard. The dark hall, the eerie atmosphere, and the cracking sounds gave off a somewhat sinister feeling. The three of them continued to walk into the hall, but there was still nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until the three of them reached the center of the hall that something strange suddenly happened. Puff, puff, puff. As the sounds continued to ring out, balls of light suddenly lit up their surroundings. These balls of light came from the densely packed oil lamps on the walls of the hall. The continuous line of oil lamps was like a winding snake, gradually lighting up from the bottom of the hall and spiraling upwards. As the oil lamps lit up, there seemed to be a cold and gloomy aura blowing past. Spectre's expression became serious. "Be careful. I didn't encounter this situation the last time I was here. I don't know what's going on now." In just a short moment, the originally dim hall was illuminated by the countless oil lamps. There was a loud bang behind them, and the three of them were all startled. They turned around and saw that the door of the hall was actually closed. Lu Yi and Puku both turned to look at Spectre. Spectre wore an innocent expression. "I didn't encounter this." It wasn't that she was deliberately hiding information, because the situation in the hall this time was completely different from the last time she came here alone. Lu Yi didn't think that Spectre was lying to her, because if Spectre had encountered this situation the last time she came here, she definitely wouldn't have been able to get out. The door of the hall was tightly shut, and Lu Yi only needed a glance to know that it wasn't something that could be broken open with brute force. "Look over there," Puku suddenly said. Lu Yi followed his gaze and looked in that direction, only to see that in front of the hall, about 1,000 feet away from them, there was a figure sitting upright. This figure was unbelievably tall. Even if it was sitting, it was at least 3 feet tall. She really couldn't imagine how powerful it would be if it stood up. This should be the big guy that Spectre had mentioned before. It was really big. It should be the same kind of thing as the skeletons they encountered outside because there were no traces of flesh and blood. However, unlike ordinary skeletons, this guy was covered in a layer of thick and heavy armor. The color of the armor was dull and rusty. No doubt it had been eroded by the passage of time. Many parts of the armor were damaged, and some parts had dark marks left behind. Those were obviously the marks of dried blood stains. It was daunting to look at. It was as if this was a great general who was good at fighting and had experienced an extremely cruel battle. The damaged armor and the remaining pitch-black bloodstains were all proof of its valiant achievements. At this moment, its head was lowered, and there was a horned helmet on its head. Because of the angle and the horned helmet, no one could see its face clearly. There was a huge sword in front of it, and two large white bony hands were holding the sword hilt, holding it motionlessly. Lu Yi was slightly puzzled. How did such a lifeless skeleton, which seemed to have been dead for countless years, force Spectre to retreat? But when she thought about the skeletons they encountered before, and how they also didn't have any vitality, it wasn't difficult to understand. End of chapter. Chapter 1440. As Lu Yi and company's gazes converged, the motionless skeleton general, who seemed to have been dead for countless years, suddenly moved. He slowly raised his lowered head. Indeed, there was no flesh on his face, only white bones. His two eye sockets were dark and deep, like two black holes that could devour all light. What caught Lu Yi's attention was that there was a short blade embedded in the skeleton general's left eye socket, all the way to the hilt. Lu Yi finally understood why Spectre was willing to seek help from others to kill this big fellow. This poor B*Tsich had clearly taken a fancy to the short blade. It would have been fine if it was an ordinary treasure, but this short blade was obviously suitable for a ghost cultivator. Furthermore, its quality was definitely not low. When the time came to retrieve the short blade, be it for personal use or for sale, it would be a good choice. Lu Yi guessed that Spectre would very likely sell it because she did not seem to have the habit of using a numinous treasure. When she killed people in the War Royale battlefield, she had always used Black Tiger Digs Out the Heart. It was unknown how she cultivated her claws, but ordinary constellations were unable to withstand her sneak attack. Lu Yi was somewhat puzzled. Since the skeleton general still had the ability to move, why did he not remove the short blade from his eye socket and instead leave it there? There was likely some unknown secret behind this. As the skeleton general raised his head, his right eye socket suddenly lit up with a will-o'-the-wisp. It was different from the will-o'-the-wisp of the skeletons outside. The will-o'-the-wisp in the skeleton general's eye socket was a dazzling golden glow, as though a tiny sun was burning within. Creak. He slowly stood up from his throne and opened his mouth. A deep and vigorous voice resounded in the hall. I've been asleep for 10,000 years. To think that someone dares to disturb the slumber of the dead. You will pay the price for this. The hall was spacious as his voice echoed. The skeleton general walked down from his throne. His footsteps were abnormally heavy, and every step caused the hall to tremble. Accompanied by his deep voice, even Lu Yi and company felt their ears buzz as their lifeblood surged. The trio had heavy expressions. Lu Yi finally understood why Spectre had said that this thing was somewhat effective against her. It was not just somewhat, but a natural counter. Spectres liked Black Tiger heart gouging, but this skeleton general had no heart for her to gouge. Furthermore, her ghost cultivation methods were probably ineffective against such an existence. Although he could feel that the enemy was very strong, perhaps the strongest enemy he had encountered so far other than Qin Yuan Dai, there was no way he could retreat now. Lu Yi slowly pulled out the Crimson Dragon Saber and said in a low voice, "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, he led the three of them forward in a sudden attack. Just as he moved, he slashed out a few saber gleams. Some of them were aimed at different parts of the withered skeleton general's body. Only one of them was aimed at his right eye socket. Of course, he didn't expect these few saber lights to succeed, but it was necessary to probe the enemy. Faced with the assault of the saber beams, the skeleton general didn't even have any intention of dodging. All he did was raise his hand in front of his right eye to block the saber beams. As for the other saber beams, they struck the skeleton general's armor, producing harsh sounds and sparks, but they did not damage it in the slightest. This thing was very hard. Although Lu Yi had casually slashed out the saber beam, with his present strength, such a saber beam was something that even a late-stage stellar constellation realm expert would find difficult to withstand. However, the skeleton general didn't seem to mind. The armor he wore looked old and tattered, but the protection it provided was much greater than imagined. Thankfully, the way he protected his right eye made Lu Yi realize that the flickering will-the-wisp in his eye socket was still his weakness. Just like when he killed the skeletons, as long as he destroyed the the wisp, he would likely be killed. The distance of 1,000 feet was covered in the blink of an eye. Lu Yi did not attempt to stab the skeleton general's right eye because such a simple attack was definitely ineffective. He had to create an opening in the battle to succeed. A beam of light flashed on the Crimson Dragon saber. With the augmentation of the heavy pressure spirit pattern, he slashed down ruthlessly. Lu Yi didn't activate the divine blade because he felt that it was useless. Although the heavy pressure spirit pattern hadn't been inferred, the assistance it provided was still not to be underestimated. Furthermore, Lu Yi had formed a three-man formation with Pu Ku and Spectre. This wasn't a formation formed with Little Dumb and Crooked Tooth. Be it Pu Ku or Spectre, their individual strength was much stronger than Little Dumb and Crooked Tooth. Even if they had fewer people, the assistance they could provide to Lu Yi was greater. The might of this saber could be said to be the strongest saber Lu Yi had ever slashed out. At the same time Lu Yi slashed down, the skeleton general also made a response. He held a huge sword in his hand that was thick and wide. It looked like it was used to charge and break through enemy lines in a large-scale battle. Normally, such a huge sword wouldn't be very agile. In fact, the skeleton general gave off the feeling that it was a little cumbersome. Lu Yi originally thought that he wouldn't be able to defend against this saber. However, the moment the saber slashed down, Lu Yi was shocked to discover that the huge sword in the skeleton general's hand had blocked the Crimson Dragon saber's blade. The huge sword in the skeleton general's hand gave off a wondrous feeling that it was easy to lift something heavy. In that instant, Lu Yi's eyes suddenly shrank because he felt that his spiritual power was instantly at a disadvantage in such a collision and was directly defeated. Then, a boundless force came from the Crimson Dragon saber. He took advantage of the momentum and floated backward, wanting to neutralize the force coming from the front. However, at the same time, the huge sword in the skeleton general's hand slashed over at lightning speed. For the first time in his life, Lu Yi felt as though his soul was about to leave his body. He hurriedly created a holy defense in front of him, but it was destroyed the moment it appeared. Every layer that appeared was destroyed. Although the might of the huge sword was weakened, it still slashed at his chest. Thankfully, at this critical moment, a fishing line suddenly wrapped around the skeleton general's sword-wielding hand. Pu Ku had taken action at the critical moment. The fishing line was pulled straight and pulled to the side. In that instant, the fishing line snapped, but it also dissipated a portion of the skeleton general's strength. Ghost had been holding a purple talisman in her hand. Upon seeing this, she did not hesitate to activate the purple talisman's might. Instantly, a barrier of light enveloped the three of them. It was a purple talisman used for protection. It was unknown if this woman had obtained it as a spoil of war from the chaotic battlefield. With a loud bang, the huge sword slashed at the purple talisman's barrier of light. At the instant the purple talisman was destroyed, the three figures flew high into the air like kites. Lu Yi's blood churned in his chest as he nearly spewed it out. Fortunately, the skeleton general's mind was a little muddled. He did not take the opportunity to pursue them. Instead, he looked down at his huge sword and fell into deep thought. After landing in a sorry state, Lu Yi glared at Ghost. "He's Yu Yao." With the purity and density of his spiritual energy, it was impossible for anyone at the Constellation Realm to so easily defeat his spiritual energy in such a clash. Only Yu Yao had this ability. He had never imagined that a monster like Yu Yao would appear in the Constellation Palace. It was precisely because he had not thought of this that he had suffered such a great loss. Of course, the most important thing was that the skeleton general's aura was clearly only at the late stage of the Constellation Realm. This had caused him to make the wrong judgment. If not for Pu Ku's quick reaction, he would have been severely injured if not killed by the huge sword. "I didn't know. I was forced to retreat before I fought with him. I really didn't know he was Yu Yao." Ghost had an innocent look on her face. It did not seem like she was faking it. Speaking of which, if she had really known that the skeleton general was Yu Yao, she would not have returned. She would have tried to hide. Retreat. Lu Yi made a prompt decision. If it were an enemy at the Constellation Realm, the three of them would have a high chance of killing him, no matter how strong he was. However, since it was Yu Yao, they could not take the risk. Lu Yi had agreed to accompany Ghost on this trip mainly because of Ghostren. Ghostren had already seen it. Their failure to kill the skeleton general was due to Ghost's own intelligence. They could not blame anyone else. Ghost nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice, indicating that she had no objections. The three of them hurriedly admitted defeat. After a short while, Lu Ye's expression turned grave. Pu Ku frowned, and Ghost looked confused. This was because the three of them, who should have left, did not leave. After they admitted defeat, there was no response from their surroundings. This was clearly abnormal. It was as if after the heavy doors closed, this place had been completely isolated from the Constellation Palace. Even the Constellation Palace's rules could not be applied here. How did you leave last time? Lu Yi looked at Ghost. Ghost said, the doors to the palace weren't closed last time, so I ran out. This time, it was clearly different from when Ghost had acted alone. The skeleton general no longer looked at his great sword. Instead, he dragged his sword and walked slowly. He walked very slowly, but it gave the three of them a sense of endless pressure. It looks like either he dies or we die. As Pu Ku spoke, he stuffed a spirit pill into his mouth and chewed. Lu Yi also knew that at this point, there was no turning back. Indeed, they could only fight to the death. Blaming Ghost? Sure. However, it was of no help to the current situation. What they needed to do now was to finish off the skeleton general. He still had a red talisman in hand. Once he used it, it should not be a problem to finish off the enemy. However, it was the only life-saving card he had. Unless absolutely necessary, he was unwilling to use it here. Lu Yi stared at the skeleton general and said, "There's good news." "What good news?" Ghost looked delighted. He's still lacking compared to the real Yu Yao. His strength is indeed that of the Yu Yao realm. It's completely different from the Constellation Palace. However, the strength he can unleash is limited. I'm guessing that it has something to do with the dagger in his left eye socket. The reason for such a deduction was not because of Lu Ye's meticulous observation, but because he had a very direct feeling from his clash with the skeleton general. In such a careless situation, if the skeleton general could unleash the strength of the real Yu Yao, even with Pu Ku and Ghost's reinforcements, they might have died. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.